Have you ever woken up and realized this is no longer your home? No more parents knocking on your door. No one reminding you to have breakfast. Just your phone alarm and an empty room staring at you as if to ask, "So, what now?" I've been in that exact situation, and honestly, the first feeling was nothing like in the movies. Excited for the freedom, yet anxious knowing that from now on, everything is up to me. So today, I want to tell you about my very first day living on my own, with all the clumsiness, surprises, and a few embarrassingly awkward moments. Also, to make you wonder, if tomorrow was the day you had to move out, how would you prepare? If you enjoy real stories with a bit of everyday drama like this, hit subscribe, or just listen till the end and decide later. Because who knows, you might find this story uncomfortably familiar. But before I start, tell me, where are you listening from? Curled up in bed, working at a cafe, or stuck in traffic on your way home? And what time is it now? Early morning, mid-workday, or late at night when everyone's asleep? I ask because each time of day will make this story hit you differently. In the morning, it might make you want to start your day more boldly. At noon, it could be an excuse to take a break and reflect a little. At night, it might make you lie in bed laughing to yourself about past memories. So wherever you are, relax, and think of this as a conversation between two people who just met but happen to share a story. No rigid script, no preaching, just honest sharing and what I've learned. And who knows, by the end, you might see that living alone isn't as scary as you thought. All right, ready? Let's go back to the first morning I stepped away from my parents' embrace. On my first day living alone, I realized I only had a few sets of clothes, an old laptop, and a box of cereal nearing its expiry date. While packing, I thought, I can just buy things later. A thought I was about to pay for. That morning, I decided to head downtown to get a few essentials so my room wouldn't feel so empty. It was a mildly chilly autumn day. I wore a hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, holding a list of things to buy. First item, an electric kettle, because without it, instant coffee and ramen would remain dreams. I found a small family-run household store on the street, the kind you rarely see anymore. I asked the woman at the counter, "Do you have the cheapest electric kettle?" She looked at me, smiled, and said, "Just moved here, right?" I nodded, thinking it was just small talk. She went inside and called out, "Another freshman, bring out the starter kit." A few minutes later, she handed me a big box. An electric kettle, a small pot, a pan, a knife, a fork, and surprisingly, a mug with an old Pepsi logo. I laughed, thanked her, and reached for my wallet. But she said, "No need. It's a welcome gift for the new neighbor." I felt happy and warm, until I heard a man nearby whisper, "Poor kid. Looks like a broke student." In that moment, I felt both amused and slightly offended. Back in my room, I opened the box enough to cook and survive the week, but it came with the image of a broke newbie. That's when I realized, sometimes people label you within seconds of meeting. But thanks to this starter kit, that night I had my first hot ramen in my new place. The story didn't end there, because the next morning, this gift led me into an even more awkward situation. But before I continue, think about this. If someone misunderstood you the first time you met, what would you do? Would you explain, or just laugh it off knowing they meant no harm? I chose to stay silent, unknowingly paving the way for the next trouble. The trouble began when I decided to use the new pan to fry eggs. The problem was, I wasn't used to an electric stove, and within 2 minutes, smoke rose like a failed barbecue party. Right then, there was a knock at the door. It was the landlord, a middle-aged man with a worried look. He stepped in, glanced at the smoke-filled room, and asked, "Planning to burn down the building?" I hurriedly explained I was just frying eggs, but he still inspected the pan as if it were evidence. He laughed. "Good thing it was free stuff, otherwise it'd be a shame." I could only scratch my head, thinking, living alone is nothing like the guidebooks. That night, I ate burnt-edge eggs and thought, growing up means learning to handle harmless misunderstandings. And the lesson is, you can't control what others think of you. The only thing you can do is live the way you want and let time prove it. Later on, I still greeted the store owner whenever I passed by, and she still called me the starter kit student. As for the landlord, every time he smelled something burning, he would joke, "Early barbecue?" I no longer felt annoyed, because I understood it was simply how they remembered me. From those two misunderstandings, I learned not to be overly sensitive to what people say. Back in the 2000s, when things weren't blown out of proportion by social media, this was just a funny memory, not drama. But it still taught me that the first impression you make on someone can stick with you for a long time. So, if you're getting ready to leave home, be prepared for these kinds of "oh my god" situations. They won't ruin your journey. In fact, they'll become stories you tell over dinner years later. So, have you ever been misunderstood the very first time you met someone? Leave a comment and tell me. Who knows, we might have a whole series of first days living alone to laugh about together. The next morning, I decided I had to be more proper. Clean the room and cook a decent meal to start my new life. At that time, the electric stove and the starter kit pan were still sitting on the table, as if challenging me once again. I opened the mini fridge, only a few eggs, some bread slices, butter, and a bottle of ketchup. An idea came. Sunny-side-up eggs with toast, simpler and safer than yesterday. I turned on the stove, kept the oil at a moderate heat, careful as if I were on a cooking game show. This time, no smoke, no unexpected knocks on the door. Everything went smoothly, until I realized I had no knife or fork. While fumbling around, I remembered the starter kit had knives, but they were all big kitchen knives that looked like horror movie props. I ended up eating eggs with a spoon, feeling both amused and slightly ridiculous. After breakfast, I thought I should go to the supermarket to buy knives, forks, dishcloths, and a few other essentials. Back then, shopping meant going to an actual store, no ordering online like today. I walked into a larger home goods store than the one from the day before. Warm yellow lighting, soft music, and long aisles of products. While browsing knives and forks, a staff member came over and asked, "Did you just move here?" I laughed. "Why does everyone know that?" She replied, "Probably because you're holding a pack of neon-colored disposable cutlery." I looked down and realized I was indeed unconsciously holding a bag of cheap neon plastic cutlery. She advised me, "Take this stainless steel set, it'll last much longer. Trust me, you'll thank me later." I followed her advice, paid, and left the store feeling just a little more grown up. Back in my room, I neatly arranged everything in the drawer. For the first time, the place actually looked like someone lived there. That afternoon, I decided to try something more ambitious. Pasta with tomato sauce. I looked up a recipe on my laptop. Back then it was Internet Explorer, loading so slowly I had enough time to boil the water. Everything went smoothly until I realized I didn't have a pasta strainer. I took a risk and poured the pot of pasta straight into the sink, using the lid to hold it back, and ended up losing half of it down the drain. I stood there, feeling both sad and amused, then decided to eat the rest like a true 2000s warrior. That night, I realized there's always something missing from your shopping list that you only notice when it's too late. And that's why I started a survival shopping list and stuck it right on the wall. That list saved me from many kitchen disasters later on, and also helped me manage money better. If you're 18 to 20 and about to live on your own, I recommend starting that list on day one. It'll save you both money and from oh my god situations like losing half your pasta. And trust me, no one wants to eat spaghetti in a child's portion when they're starving. That was day 2 in my new apartment, and I had already learned 2 things. Shop strategically and never pour pasta into the sink. Looking back, these small mistakes were actually the most interesting part of living alone. They turned ordinary days into memories you'll tell for decades. So, if you've ever lived alone, what's the first thing you forgot to buy? Or if you're about to move out, what do you think you'll most likely forget? Comment so I can see if we share the same pain points, because I believe everyone living alone has a similar forgotten items list. Could be an extra pillow, a fruit knife, or even toilet paper. And if you've never lived alone, my story could be a preview to help you prepare better. But if you have, you're probably smiling, remembering your own clumsy first day. Whoever you are, those first days always have a special flavor. A mix of chaos, humor, and plenty of lessons. And for me, that was just the beginning of a whole series of rookie stories in my very first apartment. On the third day, I woke up with a clear plan. Make myself a grand breakfast, just like on 2000s TV shows. I pictured myself sitting by the window, steaming hot coffee, golden toast, and perfectly soft-boiled eggs. In reality, I had no toaster, no orange juice, and the only coffee was cheap instant from a 24-hour store. But I stayed optimistic. No problem. I'll improvise like a pro chef. I grabbed the starter kit pan and pressed the bread in it like I'd seen on Food Network. The bottom burned black before the top even turned golden. A mini explosion on the stove. I flipped it to the other side, and it burned again. Perfect. It's okay. There are still eggs, I reassured myself. The first egg burst open like a slow-motion scene from an action movie. The second one was better, until I accidentally dumped half the salt shaker on it. The smell of salty eggs hit my nose and reminded me of an oversalted seafood meal at the beach back in 2004. At least there's coffee, I thought, and boiled water with my new electric kettle. I put in way too much coffee powder, and when I drank it, it was strong enough to wake the whole neighborhood. On the table, burnt toast, salty eggs, ultra-strong coffee. A breakfast fit for an enemy. I took a bite of toast, crunchy like a piece of cardboard. One sip of coffee, and it felt like I had just swallowed pure atomic energy. I burst out laughing, because clearly my sitcom-style breakfast had turned into a comedy episode. The result? I left it unfinished and went to the diner down the street, ordering pancakes and bacon to save the morning. Sitting there, I noticed everyone seemed to have their own signature breakfast, and I didn't. An old man at the next table asked, "Did you just move here?" I nodded. He smiled. "You'll find your dish soon enough." On the way back, I bought a used toaster from a secondhand store. It worked perfectly, as if apologizing on behalf of the starter kit pan. I told myself, okay, from now on, burnt toast is history. That evening, I tried toasting bread. And yes, it didn't burn, but I forgot the butter. I began to see a pattern. Every time I thought I had things under control, a new mistake appeared. Has anyone here ever been overconfident only to mess up the game at the last minute? If yes, comment so I don't feel like the only survivor of a breakfast like this. Or if you haven't, take a guess. What do you think I tried the next morning? Here's a hint. It involved a microwave, a glass bowl, and a rather dramatic boom. I began to notice a pattern. Every time I thought this time will be perfect, sure enough, a new mistake showed up. Like this morning, the toaster worked perfectly, but I forgot to buy butter, so no matter how good the toast was, it was as dry as the Nevada desert. As I chewed, I thought maybe the tuition fee for living alone is all these little details you don't expect. And while I was thinking that, I heard a ding from the old microwave in the corner. The thing was, last night I had put an egg in there, planning to reheat it quickly in the morning, and completely forgot about it. I walked over and opened the microwave door, feeling the same mix of curiosity and worry as when you open a dorm fridge. Just as I cracked it open, I heard a small pop and saw egg white splatter to one side. At that moment, instead of cleaning it up right away, I stood there laughing to myself, because somehow it felt like this was only the beginning. I don't know if you've ever had this happen. A dish that looks harmless but hides a huge potential for kitchen mess. I closed the microwave and decided I'd deal with it later. But of course, later usually means I'll forget again. And just as expected, when I came back a few hours later, the egg had turned into some indescribable sculpture. Looking at it, I felt both amused and slightly scared, wondering what would happen if I turned the microwave on again. So I pulled up a chair and stared at the microwave like I was watching a suspense film in home appliance version. And this was exactly the moment I accidentally started a kitchen experiment that would haunt me for the rest of the week. I decided to turn on the microwave to see how much of that egg could still survive. Just 5 seconds after hitting start, there was a loud boom inside that made me jump like someone had slammed on the door. I opened it, and it looked like someone had set off a small firecracker inside. Egg whites stuck to the microwave ceiling, while the yolk had exploded into chunks like an abstract art piece. If someone ever held an exhibition called 2000s kitchen art. I think I could submit this piece. But at that moment, I wasn't in an artistic mood. I was in a, okay, how do I clean this up? Mood. I grabbed some paper towels to wipe it, but every time I touched it, the egg crumbled into even more pieces. A faint burnt smell mixed with old eggs started spreading through the room, strong enough to make me open the window in the middle of winter. While I was scrubbing, I heard a knock on the door. It was the landlord. He peeked in, looked at the microwave, and asked, "Are you testing weapons?" I laughed and replied, "No, just breakfast." A bit louder than usual. He shook his head but smiled, and told me that when he first lived alone, he once exploded a can of Campbell's soup in the microwave. Hearing that made me feel much better. Turns out everyone has a first kitchen explosion. After he left, I kept cleaning, but the more I wiped, the more I realized I had spent my entire morning fixing one stupid decision. That's when I realized the hardest part of living alone isn't making money or paying bills. It's dealing with the consequences of good-sounding ideas. To test this theory, I went back to my desk, took a sip of cold coffee, and thought, what will I mess up next? I knew the answer would come soon. The fridge was nearly empty, and I still hadn't gone to the big supermarket. That day, I decided to write an emergency shopping list that filled almost an entire page. The list had everything from basics like toilet paper and dish soap, to things you only remember when it's too late, like pot holders. I promised myself I'd shop first thing in the morning, but in the 2000s, first thing sometimes meant maybe tomorrow. And sure enough, the next morning I felt lazy and opened the fridge looking for something to eat instead. I found an almost empty carton of milk and a box of cereal I'd bought on moving day. That's when I realized the cereal had expired last month. You know that feeling when you have to choose between eating something old and going out to buy food? I chose to eat it, thinking cereal doesn't go bad that fast. Wrong. After 3 bites, I found a few rock-hard bits and a slightly sour smell. I threw it all in the trash, looked at the milk, and thought, okay, at least I still have this. I poured it into a glass and saw it was thicker than usual, a sign you don't need Google to know is bad. So in just 10 minutes, I'd lost both breakfast and my faith in my food storage skills. I sat staring at the empty table, wondering, has anyone ever ruined breakfast 3 days in a row? If so, they would understand this mix of hunger and self-blame. I grabbed my phone to order food, but my wallet was thinner than expected after buying the toaster. So I put on a coat and went out to find something cheap but filling. On the way, I stumbled upon a small farmer's market with stalls selling pastries, fruit, and affordable coffee. I bought a bag of apples, a few muffins, and a latte. It felt like winning the food lottery. Back home, eating a muffin, I thought, I should have found this market on day one. That was the moment I realized. When you live alone, small discoveries like this can change your whole week. And sometimes the best solution to a streak of kitchen disasters is to step out of the kitchen. As I bit into the last muffin, I was already thinking about trying to make them at home, with a clean microwave, of course. And that thought led to the exploding muffin incident a few days later. But that's another story. The muffin at home idea began that very night, when I looked at the now clean microwave and thought, why not? In the 2000s, YouTube was still new, so my quick recipe came from an old magazine and a vague memory. I mixed flour, milk, and eggs in a glass bowl, confident like a Food Network chef. When the batter thickened, I added chocolate chips, because I believed everything with chocolate tastes good. I put the bowl in the microwave, set it to high, and pressed 2 minutes. The first 10 seconds looked fine, but by second 20, the mixture started rising as if preparing to leave Earth. I stared through the door, both nervous and curious to see how high it would go. And then, boom, a sound like someone snapping a balloon in a closed room. Chocolate and muffin batter splattered all over the inside, creating an unplanned brown-beige painting. The smell of burnt chocolate spread, at first pleasant, but within seconds so strong I had to open all the windows. I stood looking at the result and wondered, is this why people don't make muffins in microwaves? I started cleaning, wiping while thinking I needed a plan B for dinner. Just then, a knock came. It was the downstairs neighbor, holding a bag of baked goods and smiling. "Smelled something, were you baking?" I confessed everything, and she burst out laughing. "Everyone has their first kitchen explosion. Welcome to the club." She gave me a few real muffins, and they were so good I almost gave up on baking at home entirely. First lesson: having a friendly neighbor is one of the most essential items when living alone. Second lesson: a bad recipe plus overconfidence will always lead to disaster. And the third lesson: if you want to experiment, have kitchen wipes ready. Eating my neighbor's muffins, I started thinking, maybe I should actually learn to cook properly instead of relying on memory and impulse. But as everyone knows, having the intention is one thing, following through is another story. The next day, I was busy all day and dinner ended up being frozen pizza. This time, I even burned the edges by leaving it in too long. Luckily, no new explosions. Eating pizza, I thought, if I keep up the streak of culinary destruction, I might become a legend in the building. And a part of me kind of liked that idea, but I still wanted to prove that I could make at least one decent dish before my first month ended. So I decided, this weekend I'll invite a few new friends from the neighborhood over for dinner. Sounds simple, but with my cooking history, it was basically a battlefield invitation. And of course, I planned a simple menu to reduce the risk of disaster, or so I thought. But you know how it goes. When I say simple, it usually means sounds easy but will be chaos within 5 minutes. And sure enough, that night became one of the most chaotic yet memorable evenings of my early solo life. The idea of inviting friends over started innocently. A few people I'd met at the cafe down the street said, "Let's hang out this weekend." I thought, easy, make pasta, open a cheap bottle of wine, play some indie music, done. In the 2000s, it all sounded like the perfect evening, until you remembered your cooking track record. That morning, I went to the supermarket, bought pasta, tomato sauce, vegetables, and a few baguettes for toasting. I also bought a new set of plates, thinking it'd be weird to serve guests on plastic ones. Back home, I cleaned the apartment, put on the Dinner with Friends playlist on iTunes. Everything's still fine. But the moment I started boiling pasta, I realized I didn't have a pot big enough for 5 people. Solution: boil it in 2 batches. Problem: the first batch went cold before the second one was done. I tried to fix it by tossing everything into a pan with the sauce to reheat. The result was a sticky mass like industrial glue. Meanwhile, the baguette in the oven started burning at the edges because I forgot to set a timer. The smell of burnt bread quickly overpowered the tomato sauce, and I had to open the window in the cold air. When my friends arrived, the room was warm from the lights and carried a faint burnt scent. I seated them, opened the wine. At least I could do that without causing a fire. We laughed while prying apart clumps of pasta, turning it into a game of who can get the longest strand. One friend joked, "Is this the Lego edition of pasta?" I laughed too, since there was no hiding the state of the dish. Then someone suggested, "Why don't we just order pizza?" And everyone instantly agreed. So my home-cooked dinner ended with a delivered pizza feast. Honestly, that was the best part of the night. Sitting on the floor, eating hot pizza, and swapping kitchen disaster stories. One person shared how they tried to make soup but forgot to turn the stove on. Another told of burning an entire rice cooker. I realized, failures at the dinner table are the quickest way for people to open up to each other. First lesson: when living alone, always have the phone number of the nearest pizza place. Second lesson: never try a new recipe on the day you invite guests. It's a guaranteed chaos formula. Third lesson: sometimes what people remember isn't the food, but the story behind it. That night, we washed dishes together. Thankfully, I'd bought the new set and turned it into a group laugh. One friend asked, "What will you cook next time?" I joked, "Popcorn. Easier to clean up." But in my head, I genuinely wanted to try pasta again to redeem myself. Still, the next week was packed, and I knew I'd have to stick with quick meals. Those days, I mostly had cereal, sandwiches, or takeout, the literal eat-to-live mode. One evening, while eating a cold sandwich, I thought, I haven't cooked seriously for myself since that dinner disaster. That thought pushed me to plan a self-reward dinner for the weekend. I'd make my favorite dish from back home. Simple, no pressure, and full of family flavor. The only problem? I needed the exact recipe, and it wasn't on Google in 2007. I started digging through old emails, notebooks, and even called my mom to ask. That call turned into a long conversation, swapping the recipe and stories about my recent kitchen explosions. Mom laughed. "At least you haven't burned the house down, that's something." When I hung up, I had the full instructions, and a bit of pressure, since I couldn't blame not knowing how anymore. I bought the ingredients the next day, feeling like I was about to compete in the MasterChef Solo Edition. At that moment, I had only one goal in mind: to make a dish I could proudly show off, not apologize for. And that goal led to an evening I'll remember forever, for a reason no one could have predicted. But to tell it, I have to go back to the moment I opened the grocery bag and saw something that wasn't on the list. When I opened the bag, I expected to see everything ready so I could start cooking right away. But at the bottom, besides the vegetables and meat, there was a bright red bottle of spicy salsa. The problem was, the dish I planned to cook didn't need salsa at all, and I hadn't bought it. I figured the supermarket staff must have accidentally dropped it into my bag at checkout. Normally I would have returned it, but that day I didn't. Partly out of curiosity, partly thinking maybe I can use it. And that was the start of a fusion idea I had never tried before. Combining my mom's recipe with Mexican salsa. I told myself, this is a self-reward dinner. I have the right to be creative. I put on some light rock, poured a glass of wine, and started chopping vegetables like I was in a cooking video on MySpace. Everything went smoothly until I opened the salsa and discovered it was 10 times spicier than I expected. But by then, I had already poured it into the pan with the meat, and the fiery smell immediately filled the room. I coughed and had to run out to the balcony for air, while the pan kept bubbling inside. When I came back, the sauce had thickened into a hard-to-describe red-brown that wasn't very appealing. I kept going anyway, thinking whatever, as long as it's edible. The final plate looked decent enough, but the spicy aroma was strong enough to make my eyes water. I sat down, took a deep breath, and had a bite, immediately following it with a big gulp of wine to cool down. Turns out salsa didn't go well with the original recipe, but it did create a strangely unforgettable taste. As I ate, I thought, if Mom knew what I did to her recipe, she'd probably burst out laughing. After a few bites, I started getting used to the heat, and strangely, I began to like it. By halfway through the plate, I'd poured on the rest of the salsa, as if determined to go all the way with the decision. The result was that after dinner, I had to drink a liter of water and eat an ice cream bar to cool off. Lesson learned: creativity is great, but sometimes you should test it on a small portion first, not the entire main dish. Still, I didn't consider it a failure. At least I'd cooked myself a meal I almost finished. More importantly, it made me want to try more new dishes, instead of staying in my comfort zone. That night, while cleaning the kitchen, I noticed the salsa bottle was still half full. I picked it up, looked at it, and thought, tomorrow, I'll find a way to use the rest of this sauce. The problem was, in the fridge besides the salsa, I only had eggs, bread, and a bit of cheese. I remembered the egg explosion from the other day, and wondered if I could combine salsa with eggs without creating chaos. Curiosity won, and I decided to try it the next morning. The plan: sunny-side-up eggs with salsa and cheese, served with toast. Sounds simple, but for me, simple rarely goes as planned. The next morning, I cracked eggs into the pan, added cheese, everything fine so far. But when I poured in the salsa, the oil and sauce began to splatter like mini fireworks. I stepped back, stirring with a spoon, and for a moment, the pan let out a long sizzle that was both satisfying and worrying. The final result was a dish that was both spicy and creamy. Not bad to look at, but with a smell that wasn't exactly gentle breakfast. I finished it, wheezing slightly but laughing, because once again I turned a meal into an endurance challenge. But at least it didn't explode. As I wiped the stove, I thought, has anyone else ever accidentally invented a new dish just because they bought the wrong ingredient? If so, I'd love to hear that story. Maybe we could make a whole kitchen accident recipe book. But the story didn't end there. because the salsa still wasn't gone, and I had an even bolder idea for dinner. And this time, it involved a small barbecue party my neighbors invited me to. That morning, my downstairs neighbor knocked and asked, "We're having a barbecue in the yard this afternoon. Want to join?" I agreed immediately, tired of eating alone and happy for the chance to connect more with the neighborhood. She said, "Just bring something you want to grill or share." I looked around the kitchen, only salsa, some bread slices, and a bit of cheese. An idea popped up. I'll make salsa cheese toast. Sounds odd, but I believe there's always room for creative dishes at a barbecue. That afternoon, I brought the ingredients out to the yard, where people were lighting the grill and soft rock played from an old radio. An uncle grilling burgers asked, "What did you bring?" I confidently replied, "Salsa toast, fusion style." He raised an eyebrow but still gave me a corner of the grill. I spread salsa on the bread, added cheese, placed it on the grate, and waited for the cheese to melt. At first, everything looked fine. The cheese started to soften and gave off a rich, creamy aroma. But when the salsa began to bubble, oil and sauce dripped onto the coals, creating small sparks and clouds of smoke. Someone shouted jokingly, "Careful, we don't want to burn the place down." I flipped the bread quickly to avoid burning, but one slice still ended up charred on the edge, true to my signature style. I placed a few intact slices on a plate and offered them for everyone to try. Surprisingly, the reaction was quite positive. Some liked the unusual spicy taste. Others said it was like bar snacks in a Mexican pub. A younger guy said, "You should make another batch." And just like that, the salsa bottle was nearly empty. While making the second batch, the landlord came over, smiling. "I see, you're turning kitchen accidents into your own brand." I replied, "Exactly, and it's working." The whole group ate, drank beer, and swapped funny stories about cooking disasters. I realized these imperfect moments were what helped me connect with people the fastest. By the end of the evening, an older lady handed me a jar of homemade seasoning and said, "Try this next time. Less spicy than salsa." I thanked her and thought, another new ingredient to experiment with. Hopefully no explosions. Back in my room, I placed the seasoning jar on the shelf, feeling like I'd just opened a new chapter in my unexpected culinary journey. The salsa was officially gone, but it had given me at least 3 stories, 2 chaotic meals, and 1 fantastic barbecue. I laughed, thinking, if the supermarket hadn't accidentally put salsa in my bag that day, I might have missed this whole chain of memories. And maybe this is one of those blessings in disguise that everyone living alone experiences at some point. The problem was, that new seasoning jar made me even more curious than the salsa. And when curiosity wins, you already know, another chapter of chaos is coming. That winter came faster than I expected, and I discovered my apartment had no proper heating system. The landlord gave me an old electric heater that looked like it belonged in the Clinton era. I plugged it in, the fan sputtered, and it blew out warmth as weak as the breath of a tired cat. The first night, I wore 2 sweaters, wrapped in blankets, yet it was still cold enough to see my breath. Every morning, getting out of bed felt like an Alaska ice survival challenge in a small apartment version. I started making coffee just to hold the hot mug, not to drink it. Friends advised me to buy another heater, but I was too stingy to double my electric bill. My solution, manual heating by cooking nonstop. At least the stove gave off heat. This led to eating way too much soup and baked goods. But I told myself winter is for bulking. Then summer came, and I learned what from one extreme to another really meant. The apartment turned into a giant oven, with no air conditioning and only a noisy table fan. I opened the window hoping for a breeze, but got barbecue smells and music from the neighbor's yard instead. On the hottest night, I slept on the floor thinking it would be cooler near the window. Mistake, because the mosquitoes treated it as a buffet invitation. I woke up with at least 6 mosquito bites and the mood of someone who had survived a battlefield. In desperation, I bought a big bag of ice and hugged it while sleeping, looking exactly like I was dating a freezer. Once, I tried sleeping in the bathtub thinking the porcelain would be cooler, and it was, but so hard that I woke up with the back pain of an 80-year-old man. Lesson learned. Sometimes, smart-sounding solutions only make you feel dumber. I started counting down the days until autumn returned, like a prisoner marking days on the wall. But then I realized every season had its own misery special. Freezing winters, scorching summers, and autumn pollen allergies. When I told my mom about this over the phone, she just laughed. "You'll survive, and you'll get used to it." I laughed too, but thought, getting used to it here means buying more fans, blankets, and mosquito repellent. One summer evening, while I was fanning myself furiously, my neighbor knocked and handed me an ice cream bar. This is the survival secret. We sat on the balcony eating ice cream, talking about childhood summers, when the heat was just an excuse to play with water, not to complain. I realized what made summer less miserable wasn't a drop in temperature, but having someone to share it with. From then on, every hot night I'd bring a chair to the balcony, drink cold water, and watch the neighborhood go about their evening. Gradually, I got used to the fan noise, the barbecue smells, and even the music blasting from someone's house. I even began to like this feeling, a kind of local summer I'd never experienced while living with my parents. But one evening, while relaxing, I heard a strange noise coming from inside my apartment. It was a faint rattling sound, like someone rummaging through the kitchen. I walked in and discovered a squirrel standing on the counter next to a baguette. For a split second, we looked at each other like two main characters in a sitcom. It grabbed a piece of bread, leapt down, and bolted out the window like it was pulling off a daring heist. I froze for a moment, then burst out laughing. It was my first time being burgled by wildlife. From that day, I started calling it my squirrel buddy, and sometimes left a few peanuts on the balcony. Some neighbors said I was training it to come back for more theft, but I preferred to think of it as building diplomatic relations. Summer drifted by with evenings that were both hot and fun, and my squirrel buddy's surprise visits were sometimes the highlight. I realized even the most inconvenient things, heat, mosquitoes, a bread-stealing squirrel, could become memorable stories when you live alone. And maybe that's why, to this day, whenever I see a squirrel, I still smile remembering that first summer. But the story with my squirrel buddy didn't end there, because that autumn, it brought me a completely unexpected surprise. And that surprise began on the first cold morning of September, when I opened the balcony door. That morning, I opened the balcony door to find my squirrel buddy sitting on the railing, with what looked like a piece of cloth in its mouth. At first, I thought it was building a nest, but on closer look, I realized it was a piece of my bath towel. Somehow, it had gotten into the bathroom, dragged the towel out the window, and was now about to take it back to its base. I stood there, torn between laughing and worrying. If it could take a towel, who's to say it wouldn't try for the duvet? I stepped closer to retrieve it, and it ran off, leaving the towel fragment behind like a note saying, "I'll let you off this time." While laughing about that, I accidentally discovered another squad, also living with me. Uninvited guests known as ants. We first met in the mornings, when I saw a long parade of ants marching from the balcony into the kitchen. I tested it by placing a piece of bread on the table, and just like in a documentary, it vanished in 10 minutes under hundreds of tiny feet. In a way, I started seeing them as colleagues since they worked in teams and were way more diligent than me. But then I realized I was sharing breakfast with them, and that's when the war began. I cleaned the kitchen, sealed the door gaps, sprayed vinegar, but the ants just treated it like a find a new route game. One morning, I even found a fake scorpion, a toy someone had dropped in the hallway, in the kitchen, and nearly had a heart attack. And then, the next week, the weather got colder and I discovered a few bedbugs trying to move into my blankets. At first, I tried shooing them away, but after a few sleepless, itchy nights, I launched a full cleaning campaign. At that point, it felt like summer had mosquitoes, autumn had ants, winter would probably bring mice. Like nature had a relay team to test me. When I told my neighbors, they just laughed. "Welcome to real life, where you're never truly alone." That line was both funny and annoyingly true. I started joking to friends that I was living in a sitcom called Roommates You Can't Kick Out. I even thought about making a scoreboard, tracking each species' achievements. Squirrel theft, ants, breakfast sabotage, bedbugs, sleep disruption. One evening, while biting into salsa toast, I saw my squirrel buddy return. This time, not alone. It brought along a smaller squirrel, probably the apprentice. I wondered if I was witnessing the next generation preparing to take over the territory. And the idea hit me. If I couldn't kick them all out, why not make peace and turn them into guests? That night, I planned a balcony party. Breadcrumbs for the squirrels, and a few drops of honey for the ants, far from the kitchen. Partly out of curiosity, partly because, why not? The next day, I tried it, and sure enough, in just 15 minutes, my balcony became a small-scale chaotic scene. But at least I felt like I was managing the situation, or at least turning the intrusion into a community event. That night, as I closed the balcony door, I thought, living alone teaches you more survival skills than any course ever could. And sometimes that skill is simply knowing how to laugh when you realize you're sharing your space with a tiny zoo. But this zoo was about to give me another challenge. As winter truly began and I had to face my biggest fear. Winter truly arrived in the first week of December, when the temperature dropped to the point where every breath felt like my nose was freezing. The old electric heater started to betray me, making a faint screech and giving off a light burnt smell like it was hinting I should write a will. I tried layering clothes, 2 pairs of socks, 3 sweaters, but still felt the cold creeping in through every gap. At night, I slept with a beanie on, yet still woke up at 3 a.m., teeth chattering like a horror movie cast. One morning, I woke to find a thin layer of ice on the inside of the window frame, as if the apartment was cosplaying as a freezer. Morning coffee was no longer optional, but mandatory to keep my blood moving. I learned to make a big pot of soup every evening, both to eat and to warm up the room. But the downside was that my hands were always dry and cracked from washing dishes in cold water. Putting on lotion felt like trying to rub cream into ice. Going outside wasn't any easier. The cold wind slapped my face, making me bow my head like I was apologizing to the whole world. On snowy days, I felt both delighted and despairing. It was beautiful, sure, but snow also meant shoveling the walkway every morning. I started feeling jealous of the squirrels on my balcony. At least they had natural fur coats. The peak came one night when a snowstorm knocked out the power, plunging the whole neighborhood into darkness and dropping the temperature like a scene from the day after tomorrow. I lit every candle I had, wrapped myself in blankets, and ate instant noodles cooked with heat from the gas stove. That's when I realized that living alone in winter meant having no one to share warmth with, except my laptop. I played every warm sitcom video I owned, partly to hear human voices, partly to forget the cold. A commercial on TV said, "Winter is the perfect time to get close to your loved ones." I almost spat hot tea at the screen. It's not that I hate winter, but this one made me understand why people in cold places drink hard liquor like water. One night, while I was bundled up watching TV, my squirrel buddy appeared on the balcony, looking at me through the frost-covered glass. The sight was so strange that I opened the door and handed it a piece of bread. It took it and disappeared into the snow. I wondered if it felt as cold as I did, or if it was looking at me thinking, "Wow, this guy is really fragile." While wrapping myself in another blanket, I realized this winter was testing not just my body, but my mind. There were days I just wanted to sleep until spring came, skipping all bills, work, and responsibilities. But I still had to go out for work, still had to buy food, still had to clean. No one else would do it for me. I began to understand the saying, being an adult means getting up even when you want to stay down. And sometimes, getting up means putting on more layers, wearing gloves, and going out for coffee just to feel like you still exist. Every morning, walking to work through the white-covered streets, I exhaled clouds of breath and thought, I'm really living here now. And even when my fingers went numb from the cold, I still felt a bit proud for not giving up. I also noticed that in cold places, people talk to each other more. Maybe because everyone needs a little warmth from others. An old lady at the grocery store once told me, if you can survive your first winter, the rest will be easier. I didn't know if she was right, but that sentence stuck with me the entire winter. On the worst days, I thought of it like a video game mission. Just get through this level, the next one will be less hard. I started writing down one positive thing each day, It could be a cup of hot chocolate, or the beautiful sight of snow falling outside the window. Strangely, when I did that, winter didn't feel entirely like the enemy anymore. It felt more like a weird test I was slowly adapting to. Still, I dreamed of warm days, and of the first moment I could take off my heavy coat without shivering. March arrived, the ice began to melt, but the wind was still cold enough to remind me not to get cocky. One morning, when sunlight streamed through the window, I realized I had survived my first winter without running back to my parents' house. That feeling was hard to describe, both relief and the sense of completing a life challenge, and it made me more confident for any future winters. However, just a few days later, a new challenge appeared, this time not weather-related, but dental. I started to feel a slight pain in a molar whenever I ate something hard. At first, I thought it was just sensitivity from the cold, but the pain grew until I had to stop eating. The problem was, I hadn't seen a dentist since moving out, and my health insurance was stingy. I tried enduring it for a few more days, but every bite made me wince. One night, while eating soup, I bit into a peppercorn and nearly cried from the pain. That's when I knew I couldn't delay any longer. The next morning, I booked a dentist appointment, both anxious and hopeful they could fix it quickly. But of course, like everything else in my life back then, quick fix was a luxury concept. The clinic said I'd have to wait a week for an opening, and in the meantime, I'd be living with the pain. That week became one of the most memorable endurance tests of my life, and it began the story of how one tiny tooth could make you feel 20 years older overnight. On the first day of waiting for my appointment, I learned one thing: you can skip many things, but you can't skip chewing. I tried eating porridge, soup, soft foods, but if I accidentally bit down on the sore tooth, my whole face jolted like I'd been splashed with ice water. Even morning coffee became a challenge, as the hot temperature sent a sharp jolt through my tooth like an electric shock. I started drinking lukewarm coffee and eating yogurt, feeling like I was on a 90-year-old man's diet. A friend heard me complain and said, "Just rinse with salt water, it'll help." I tried, and it worked for 5 minutes. On the third night, I couldn't sleep because my tooth throbbed in sync with my heartbeat, an experience I never want to repeat. I sat in bed, pressing an ice pack to my cheek, watching the clock tick slower than ever, like it was mocking me. Each chime of the clock marked another hour I hadn't slept, and another hour away from my dentist appointment. During the day, I became irrationally cranky, like when you're hungry, tired, and in pain all at once. At work, coworkers asked, "You okay?" And I just nodded slightly. Even talking made my tooth hurt. By day 5, I officially lowered my meal standards to, as long as it has calories, ice cream, pudding, and mashed potatoes. That was also the day I realized ice cream not only numbed the pain temporarily, but also helped me feel less miserable. I joked with my neighbor, "I might survive on an all-ice cream diet." She replied, "Sounds like a dream, until you try it." On the 6th day, I tried drinking alcohol to forget the pain. It didn't work, but at least I slept a few hours. Finally, the appointment day came, and I walked into the clinic like I was stepping onto the red carpet, minus the cameras and fans. The dentist took one look and said, "Oh, that's a big cavity. Needs a filling right away." I felt both relieved and embarrassed. The procedure was quicker than I expected, and within 30 minutes, the pain was gone as if it had never existed. Leaving the clinic, I was grateful, but also mad at myself for enduring a whole week only to realize I could have fixed it much sooner. I had my first proper meal in a week like someone who'd just been pardoned. A hot burger with crispy fries. Every bite tasted twice as good because I knew I'd regained the privilege of chewing without pain. That evening, I sat on my chair, full and truly relaxed for the first time in days. I put on an old movie, wrapped myself in a blanket, and realized peace often comes right after you've survived a string of discomforts. But that peace didn't last because outside the window, snow began falling heavily again. I looked out, thinking about shoveling snow the next morning, and chuckled. The survival loop begins again. Still, this time felt different, as if every problem I overcame made me less afraid of new ones. I remembered what the old lady at the grocery store had said, "Survive your first winter, and the rest will be easier." She might be right, Or maybe I was just hallucinating from being full and pain-free. In my head, I was already planning for when it got warm. Cleaning the balcony, hosting a barbecue, and trying new recipes, hopefully without explosions. I knew that once spring came, there'd be new stories, and most likely, they'd involve either food or neighbors. Because living alone is like that. Chaotic, tiring, but always leaving room for unexpected memories. And even if each day ended with exhaustion, I felt like I was slowly growing up in ways I hadn't expected. Growing up here didn't mean perfect maturity. It meant figuring things out and being able to laugh at myself. Because honestly, if you can't laugh when your meal explodes or your tooth hurts for a week, survival gets harder. I looked around my apartment. Still small, still old, but now full of my own marks and stories. And I realized, every scratch on the table, every burn mark on the pan was a medal from my battles of living alone. That night, I turned off the lights, lay down, and smiled faintly thinking, I'm still here, still breathing, and still haven't given up. Outside, the wind whistled through the window cracks. But this time, it sounded more like background music than a threat. I pulled the blanket over me, closed my eyes, and promised myself I wouldn't put off important things again, like going to the dentist or buying a new heater. And of course, I also knew I'd break that promise at least once in the next year. But that's another story. Starting the day, I decided to upgrade my apartment with something I thought would be a blessing, but actually kicked off a whole new series of problems. That upgrade was an automatic coffee machine, a purchase I believed would change my life. I imagined waking up each morning to the smell of freshly brewed coffee, just like in commercials. Reality. On the first morning, it roared like a lawn mower. It brewed a cup, but forgot to keep it in the cup, letting half the liquid spill across the counter. I stared at the spreading puddle like it was a CSI crime scene, wondering if I'd accidentally bought a prototype. After a few experiments, I discovered the fault was mine. I'd forgotten to attach the tray properly, but even with the tray in place, the machine brewed coffee so weak I suspected it was made for people afraid of caffeine. I was annoyed but also amused because this was basically a miniature version of living alone. You expect perfection but get an experience. A few weeks later, I barely used the machine, going back to boiling water on the stove and brewing with a fin filter. But the machine stayed there, taking up counter space, as a reminder that upgrading doesn't always mean better. Looking back, since moving out from my parents, I'd survived a whole list of chaos. Exploding muffins, Lego pasta, oven-like summers, freezer-like winters, a towel-stealing squirrel, a week-long toothache, and now a backfiring coffee machine. All of it formed a collection of stories I'd retell over and over, adding a little extra drama each time. And strangely, when you retell them, the most exhausting moments become the funniest parts. Maybe because they're proof you made it through and still found a reason to laugh. I won't claim everyone will enjoy moving out as much as I did, because circumstances differ for each person. But I believe one thing: no matter how chaotic, you'll find your own way to get through it. And if you've never lived alone, maybe you should try it at least once. Not to prove anything to anyone, but to see how you'd react when a muffin explodes or a squirrel steals your stuff. And if you've already been through it, tell me your legendary story. Maybe we could compile them into a book, because in the end, living alone is like a long-running sitcom, full of surprises, sometimes bitter, but always worth watching. And the question for you is, if you woke up tomorrow and started your first season of living alone, what's the first thing you'd do? Hey guys, today I want to tell you a strange and slightly chilling story about the final days of Queen Elizabeth I. She ruled England for 45 years, transforming it from a fragile kingdom into a formidable empire. But in the end, Elizabeth did not pass away amid applause, but in silence, loneliness, and a very human fear. No heroic declaration, no historic last words. She simply stood still and gradually faded away from the world. Records from the time say she refused to lie down for days, afraid that if she did, she would never wake up again. And indeed, she stood like that until her body no longer had the strength to keep her alive. Have you ever wondered, What could make such a powerful woman feel fear like a child? Was it illness, the dread of aging, or the weight of past decisions coming back to haunt her? In this video, we'll explore every small detail to understand what really happened. And if you find untold historical stories like this one fascinating, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss the next part. Back to the story. It was spring of 1603 at Richmond Palace, where Elizabeth spent her final days. She wouldn't let doctors in, wouldn't allow anyone to mention death, and wouldn't let anyone touch her. The servants were only allowed to stand outside, listen quietly, and wait for something. But nothing came. No cries of pain, no calls for help. Only an old woman standing motionless, eyes wide open, not knowing if she was still alive or slowly leaving. Many later said the room barely felt alive, as if life had slipped away long before anyone realized. For hours on end, she said nothing, ate nothing, drank nothing. She just stood there. Some say it was the final pride of a queen. Others believed it was a long, drawn-out delirium. But everyone agreed on one thing. No one had ever died in such a strange way. And what frightened people most was that no one dared to say she had died. Until several days later, the room where Elizabeth spent her last days didn't feel like a place for the living. It felt like a waiting room for death, but no one dared to say it aloud. Everything was covered in red velvet, but the curtains were always drawn, as if even sunlight was not allowed to disturb her. The chair by the window still bore dried tea stains. No one had seen her touch her final meal. No voices, no music, no signs of ordinary life. Servants were ordered not to enter unless called, but that call never came. She didn't lie down, didn't rest. For 3 straight days she stood, without stepping even half a foot away. No one in the room dared admit they might be looking at someone who was already dead, but not yet declared. One servant whispered that her eyes were empty, unblinking, unresponsive, just staring into space. They kept replacing the candles, because she wouldn't allow the darkness to enter. But that light, some said, was even more terrifying. Some believed she was still conscious. Others thought she was already gone. Only her body hadn't collapsed yet. The royal physicians were present, but none dared step through the door. They left written messages, hoping for a reply, but no one knew if those notes were ever opened. Fear began creeping in, not just because she might have died, but because no one wanted to be the first to say it. A young maid said she tried to get close, to listen for breath, but in the end, she stepped back, too afraid of the answer she might hear. Because if the queen was still alive and angry, the consequences would not be pleasant at all. But no one wanted to just stand there, waiting in silence, in a room that felt like it had stopped breathing. Some rotated shifts, just to escape the feeling that the room itself was watching them. Elizabeth's fingers began to curl, her face sunken, yet no one made any official move. No cry of pain, no final words, no clear movement to confirm what had happened. They say there was a moment, just a few seconds, when the entire room fell into absolute stillness. Not because someone commanded it, but because everyone felt the time had come. An older maid burst into tears, only to be quickly told to remain silent. She didn't cry out of grief, but because no one had the courage to say, "Our queen is dead." No doctor confirmed it. No official record was written at that moment. Only absence, a hollow space stretching in the dim candlelight. A servant walked behind Elizabeth, exhaled gently, then softly called her name. There was no response, and that was when the room finally accepted what they had avoided for 3 days. Elizabeth I, the Queen of England, was gone. No grand ceremony, no ringing bells, no shouted announcement, just prolonged silence and glances that avoided meeting one another. Someone quietly closed the curtain, as if to shield the room just a little more. The candles still burned, but the light no longer felt warm. And the woman who once stood against the Pope, the Spanish army, and even the biases of her era, ended her life standing. No one spoke of it for many days afterward, as if acknowledging it was somehow taboo. Only when an official decision came from the Royal Council was her death formally announced. But by then, the rumor had already spread across the city. People said she had died 3 days before it was recognized. Some believed she was still alive for hours after being mistakenly thought dead. But others claimed everyone knew the truth. They just didn't want to be the first to say it. Because everyone feared that if they spoke too soon, they would bear the burden of a truth the nation wasn't ready for. After Elizabeth's death, people began to question the way she was cared for, and noticed something odd. No one had physically touched her during those final days, not due to a lack of doctors, but because they had all been trained to observe, not to act on anything uncertain. At the time, uncertain was just another way of saying, better leave it alone. Some believed that bloodletting might rebalance the body, but no one dared attempt that on the most powerful woman in the land. She didn't allow it either. Perhaps she knew that one more drop of blood would mean she'd collapse. There's also a theory that what truly ruined her health was the very makeup she wore every day. Venetian ceruse, a fashionable white powder, contained lead and mercury. She had used it since youth, and by the end of her life, she almost never appeared without a thick layer of it. Her skin had eroded, as thin as paper, yet the powder sat on top like a mask. One physician once wrote in his diary, "You could not tell by looking at her whether she was smiling in pain or no longer there." Many modern experts believe that toxins from her cosmetics slowly entered her bloodstream, causing organ failure. But to the physicians of her time, it was simply a constitutional issue. They prescribed rosewater, plasters, and a mix of herbal roots, with instructions to get some rest. No one dared suggest removing the white makeup. That was the last thing Elizabeth still had control over. Instead, they stood around her, as if waiting for a miracle or for someone else to take responsibility. One person proposed rosemary inhalation therapy, placing leaves in cloth bags and hanging them around the room. Another suggested lighting more candles, because light will help the soul stay. No one brought painkillers. No one spoke of death. They only noted weak pulse, shallow breath, unresponsive to voice, and they left her standing there, untouched, untreated, undiagnosed. Perhaps they feared being beheaded if Elizabeth suddenly woke up and they had given the wrong medicine. Or perhaps they simply did what the court expected: remain silent, protect her image, and wait for orders from above. During that time, the mercury jar remained on the dressing table as a silent reminder. It was a symbol of the price of beauty and power when combined with isolation. No one touched the jar. No one removed it. It was still there, even days after Elizabeth was taken from the room. A servant wrapped it in cloth, not out of fear of poisoning, but fear that she might come back for it. In a society that believed royals were half human, half divine, uttering the word dead about the queen was forbidden. Instead of a clear statement, they used the phrase, "She has entered eternal stillness." And in that stillness, England began to shift, though no one truly knew what would come next. At the time, no one thought much about mercury, lead, or symptoms. They only remembered that she stood for 3 days without falling, without speaking, without saying goodbye. And perhaps that's how Elizabeth wanted to be remembered. No one saw the moment she collapsed. No one kept that image. Those present agreed to erase that detail from all official records. They called it a passing fit for a queen. But the truth was, she had died, and no one had the courage to look it in the eye. For 45 years, Elizabeth had controlled everything. And in the end, she controlled how she disappeared from the world. Perhaps that was her final and loneliest victory. In her final days, Elizabeth didn't just stop eating. She refused all forms of physical care. She wouldn't let anyone touch her, wouldn't allow her clothes to be changed, and absolutely refused to bathe. This left her maids confused, but no one dared question her. They were only allowed to spray perfume around the room, hoping the scent would mask the truth. No one knew why she acted this way until a servant whispered, "She believes if she falls, she'll never get back up." It wasn't stubbornness. It was the very real fear of someone used to controlling everything. Elizabeth had lived her whole life under the eyes of others. In death, she didn't want anyone to see her weakened. Each time the maids brought in hot water, she simply shook her head and turned away. She wore the same black gown for days. A heavy, thick fabric, cold to the touch when temperatures dropped. No one dared ask if she was cold. No one offered to help her change. A maid once suggested, "May I help you lie down for a bit, Your Majesty?" But she gave no reply. She didn't lie down. She didn't sit. She didn't rest. Her back remained straight as a statue, her gaze fixed on the wall. One doctor observed, "That posture isn't a sign of vitality. It's defiance slowly wearing out." In court culture, the queen was a symbol, and symbols were not allowed to collapse in front of others. Elizabeth understood that better than anyone. Even when her hands began to tremble, she hid them beneath her gown. When her knees could no longer bear weight, she gently leaned on the bed frame, but never asked for help. It was a silent battle between a body breaking down and a will that refused to surrender. Some said she slept standing for moments. During those days, time lost its meaning. Day and night blurred together under candlelight. Servants rotated shifts, but no one dared speak unless spoken to. Elizabeth gave no orders, but her silence alone made everyone fall quiet. The bedroom became a waiting space. No one knew what they were waiting for, but they all felt it. The smell in the room began to change, from herbs to something indescribable. A servant trained in medicine tried to stay calm, but eventually asked to be reassigned. Candles burned out faster, as if the air itself had changed. Many couldn't bear it anymore, but still stood guard because no one wanted to be the first to leave. They said, "She's still alive. We cannot leave while she's still standing." And they were right. Elizabeth still stood, still unmoving, still unyielding. In a vast palace, among hundreds of people, she was the only one who no longer knew what rest was. Perhaps she believed that as long as she stood, time wouldn't dare move forward. Perhaps standing was her last way to hold on to the crown, even if only for a few more hours. No one knew what she was thinking. No one knew if she could still think at all. But everyone in that room understood. They were witnessing something that had never happened before. A queen who refused to rest, refused to fall, refused to vanish. Even when every sign showed she was utterly exhausted. Some thought it was pride. Others saw it as loneliness at a level beyond words. And as always, that loneliness was hidden beneath the hem of a long black gown. Not a single word was spoken. No one was allowed to ask how she felt, because this was the queen, and the queen was not allowed to be weak, even when facing the very end of life. That's why Elizabeth said almost nothing for many days in a row. A lady-in-waiting tried whispering into her ear, hoping for a response. But all they heard was a faint, broken breath. It wasn't that her will was gone. Her body simply no longer allowed words to come out as they once did. For years, Elizabeth ruled with intelligence and words. Now both faded like smoke. She had once silenced an entire parliament with a single sentence. Now, she couldn't even hear her own voice. One doctor suspected her mouth had begun to decay due to metal compounds in her makeup sinking too deep. The attendants noticed something had changed. Every time she tried to move her lips, no sound came out. The closest person to her saw. Her tongue had darkened, as if blood no longer flowed properly. Her teeth, already weak, had become loose and visibly discolored. Her smile, once a political weapon, was no longer an expression, but a painful memory. Some believed Elizabeth suffered from a long-standing mouth infection, but no one dared to treat it. There were no antibiotics, no anesthetics, and no one would dare suggest pulling the queen's teeth. Even a mild fever could turn fatal, especially in a body already worn out. But that exhaustion didn't come overnight. It built up through years of enduring, maintaining image, and living under absolute pressure. An old maid who had served her since youth recalled, "I've never seen her this weak, yet I've also never seen her let it show." And that was the tragedy. Elizabeth wouldn't let anyone see her pain, even when it had reached the bone. Someone tried offering her warm honey water, but she wouldn't open her mouth. Another gently placed a hand on her shoulder, hoping for a confirming glance. There was no response, no rejection, no agreement. She simply stood there, mouth closed, gaze scattered, and all that was once speech, now gone. A young servant whispered, "If this is a performance, she's the only one who knows when to drop the curtain." But the performance dragged on, and the audience began to worry they might not last until the end. No one spoke for her. No one had the authority to say what the entire nation was waiting to hear. And so they waited, in silence, waiting until the final word that no one heard no longer had a chance to exist. In the diary of a courtier, a line was written. We were forbidden from saying the end, but silence spoke for us. No one recorded Elizabeth's last words, because perhaps there were none. Greatness doesn't always die to applause. Sometimes it vanishes in a room no one dares breathe loudly in. And so, words, the very thing that once empowered her, were the first to abandon her. The last doctor left the room without saying a word, leaving only a simple note, no longer responsive. It wasn't a diagnosis. It was the coldest truth of old medicine. Sometimes doing nothing is still a decision. The remaining attendants kept their watch. No one knew if it was to protect her or to keep her from leaving one final time. The room remained unchanged, curtains drawn, candles still burning, and the woman who once made all of Europe bow could no longer utter a single word. That silence wasn't merely an ending. It was the entire final chapter written in blank space. Some rulers die in war. Others pass amidst trumpets and flags. But Elizabeth, she chose to stand still, without speaking, without tears, without complaint. That ending, so quiet it would be disrespectful to try making it louder than it truly was. And in the dim candlelight, an era came to a close, not with bells, but with a mouth fully sealed shut. No farewell was needed, no rushed funeral, only a woman standing, then quietly walking into the next world. The greatest issue wasn't that she had died. It was that no one dared say it first. She still stood, body leaning slightly, eyes half open, hands hanging loosely. But there was no movement, no breath flickering through the candlelight. A guard whispered, "If she's alive, why is she so cold?" Another replied, "If she's dead, how is she still standing?" No one stepped forward to check. No one wanted to be the first to touch the queen, even just to be sure. A doctor was summoned. He peered through the door crack, then stepped back, his face pale. He simply said, "I'm not authorized to make a diagnosis without orders from the council." And so the entire court watched. No one left the room, but no one approached either. A motionless figure stood at the center of an empire, freezing everyone's thoughts. The candles burned to their ends, wax dripping to the floor like signs of what no one dared say aloud. A maid sobbed silently, but no one comforted her, because everyone was staring in the same direction. Seconds stretched into minutes, minutes into hours. No one knew exactly when it started or when it might end. Some began to breathe heavily, others clenched their robes tightly just to stay grounded. Then, a faint sound, a soft rustle of fabric, but no one could tell where it came from. All eyes turned to Elizabeth. No change, no reaction. That was when everyone understood. This was no longer a living person, but not yet someone gone. A liminal space freezing the room in suspended time. No one spoke, no one moved, and in that moment, perhaps everyone thought the same thing. If she's still here, what are we supposed to do? A young soldier trembled and slowly backed toward the door, as if fearing the hovering truth might cling to him. An old advisor murmured something in Latin, sounding like a plea for peace. No one scolded him, for no one knew what else to do. The bravest lady-in-waiting placed her hand on her chest, not on the queen's, but on her own, just to check that she was still alive. A strange moment when the living began to question their own reality, because one person had stood too long in silence. At last, a voice broke the stillness, softly, slowly. "Perhaps it's time." But no one replied, no one reacted, no one moved. And so, they all stood a little longer, not because they didn't know what had happened, but because no one wanted to bear the weight of ending an era. She still stood, and until someone officially declared otherwise, she was still the queen. After everything settled, people began to ask questions, not about how she lived, but why she died the way she did. Medical scholars in later centuries tried to reanalyze the symptoms. Exhaustion, silence, loss of reflex, and standing motionless for days. Some suggested an infectious disease, but if that were true, why didn't anyone else in the palace get sick? Others leaned toward a cardiac cause, but no one ever checked her pulse in those final moments. A common theory is heavy metal poisoning, mercury, lead, and compounds in her cosmetics. Modern doctors agree that with prolonged use and unregulated doses, that could very well be the cause. But one theory still unsettles many, that her death might not have been natural. No one dared say poisoned, but everyone knew the court had no shortage of people eager to see the throne vacant. Elizabeth never married. No children, no official heir declared while she was still conscious. And in that very vacuum, ambition spread like fog through the palace. Many of her closest advisors had quietly reached out to potential successors, even while she was still alive. James VI of Scotland, a distant relative, began to appear in private discussions. Those who had once sworn loyalty to Elizabeth were now calculating their places in the next court. And the striking thing was, everyone knew her health was declining, but no one stepped in to stop it. They didn't harm her, but they didn't save her either. No one brought better medicine. No one insisted she rest. No one dared go against her will to preserve her life. Because if she lived just a few months longer, many plans would be delayed. Many promotions wouldn't happen. In a palace full of power, sometimes the quickest way up is to wait for the one above to disappear. A clerk wrote in his diary, "No one said it aloud, but I had the feeling they were letting her go." A young physician once asked, "Why don't we at least try to save her one more time?" But no one replied, because the real answer was too hard to say and too easy to be blamed for. Even before the funeral was held, many had already switched the emblems on their coats. The first letter sent to Scotland was signed before her death was officially announced. Queen Elizabeth wasn't murdered, but she also wasn't kept alive. And in that fragile in-between, many had already found new places for themselves. One courtier whispered, "She left as she lived, needing no one, relying on no one." But another countered, "Not needing, or simply having no one left." In the royal quarters, rumors spread faster than orders from the council. Some said Elizabeth chose that moment, so no one else could control her fate. Others believed that moment wasn't hers to choose. It belonged to those standing right outside her closed doors. No matter the truth, the death of Elizabeth I wasn't just the end of a person. It was the beginning of a new era. With every knock on a door, someone new rose. With every farewell, a whisper of power was exchanged. And while the nation wore black, the victors were already choosing new colors to wear. The throne hadn't even cooled, but the game had begun long before. Some asked, if Elizabeth had lived just one more week, would England have taken a different path? But others smiled. She didn't need more time, just less loneliness. That line never appeared in any history book, but it was passed down, quietly, softly, heavier than any funeral bell. And like every political legend, the truth didn't lie in how she died, but in who benefited from her death. That answer was never written in official records. It lived in glances, and in the silent consensus of an entire court. And in that final candlelight, a dynasty ended with the absence of loyalty. 4 years, Elizabeth wasn't just a ruler. She was a symbol, her face on coins, her portrait in every major building. Her name was a declaration. Her voice was policy. Her gaze could determine the fate of a nation. She never married, had no children, shared no power with any man. And thus, the court crafted the image of the Virgin Queen like a living goddess. But every myth has its weakness, and for Elizabeth, that weakness was time. As age crept in, the symbol began to crack. She no longer appeared in public, no longer gave speeches, no longer felt immortal. Her final portraits were all retouched. Whiter skin, brighter eyes, steadier hands. One court painter once confessed, "I didn't paint the queen, I painted the memory of her." In the royal chambers, they whispered, "The legend isn't here anymore. Only the person inside it remains. That person, growing weaker, drying out, fading slowly inside the very gown she once used to command the world. A gown that once represented power now felt like chains. A layer of powder that once terrified Europe was now only masking the final signs of decay. But what many struggled to accept was not her weakness, but the fact that she let it show. For the first time in nearly half a century, Elizabeth no longer controlled her own image. No more corrections, no more edits, no one close enough to erase the signs of reality. And like every statue worn by wind and rain, the mask finally fell. Behind it was no miracle, no divinity, just a tired, aging, and lonely woman. Those who once praised her now said little. Those who once feared her no longer stood tall. One courtier admitted, "I used to think she was invincible, but in the end, she was simply the last to fall." Those who once kept a respectful distance now kept it out of fear of responsibility. And Elizabeth, the woman who once defined an entire century, now stood in the palace like a forgotten shadow. A servant said, "I looked at her and didn't know whether to call her queen or someone in need of help." In cabinet meetings, the title the Queen gradually became just she. People began adjusting to the next era, even though the current one hadn't officially ended. Respect didn't vanish with an insult, it vanished with silence. No one spoke ill of her, they just stopped speaking of her at all. And that's how a symbol dies in the real world. Not because it lost power, but because those around it no longer needed what it represented. They needed a transition, a successor, something else. And Elizabeth, with all her greatness, became the final obstacle to the very nation she once lifted up. In her final days, no one wanted to face her, because to face her was to face the end. An old maid said, "I couldn't look into her eyes, because in them, I saw disappointment." No one knew who she was disappointed in, herself or those waiting for her to go. Perhaps both. Perhaps everyone. Perhaps no one mattered anymore. In the end, that symbol didn't break from outside pressure. It crumbled from not being sincerely upheld. Elizabeth didn't lose the throne because of a coup. She lost it because no one lifted it for her anymore. And when the mask finally fell, they didn't see a goddess. They saw a vacant stare. That stare wasn't sad, wasn't angry, simply left the game. And in that moment, England realized the symbol had fallen. The person still stood, but the era was over. As soon as her death was confirmed, or rather no longer denied, men began returning to the palace. For days before, they had kept their distance out of respect, but really out of strategy. They didn't enter to mourn. They came to calculate. Each wore an expression not too sad, not too relieved, just enough to avoid suspicion. A private meeting was held that very afternoon, while her body had yet to be moved. They didn't call it funeral preparations. They called it planning for stable transition. No one mentioned her name. No one said, "The Queen has passed." They used the phrase, "The current situation requires swift action." Some whispered about the will. Others debated locking the royal study. Every person present had once bowed to her. Now they bowed only to the moment. One of them muttered, "We must maintain appearances, at least until the funeral." Another replied, "And afterward, any appearance will do." They discussed succession, but the big decisions had already been made. A letter to Scotland had been sealed that morning, and everyone knew it. The public announcement was delayed until the next morning, not out of respect, but to prepare the official speech. In the meantime, a group began logging everything. Who entered, who stood where, who held the study key. Not to record history, but to make sure no one could accuse anyone later. The death of a queen is sensitive, but the death of a dynasty is an opportunity. They checked the seal box, financial records, and unsigned documents. Some papers were quietly taken. No one asked, no one stopped them. And in the middle of it all, Elizabeth still stood, or lay, or had already been moved. No one remembered for sure, because by then all attention had shifted from the person to the power. In England's history, rarely has someone who just died been forgotten so quickly. one of her former advisors, on his way out, paused for a second, looking at the seat where she used to hold court. He said nothing, gave no bow, just turned away. And so, the Elizabethan era ended, not with a proclamation, but with the sound of footsteps leaving the room where power once lived. The gentlemen resumed their work. Meetings, letters, orders, currency printing. No one asked where she would be buried. No one needed that answer immediately, because the more important question had already been answered. Who's next? And once that answer was clear, everything else was just ceremony. Elizabeth left no heir, and that was no accident. She once declared, "I am married to England." That quote was once printed with pride, etched into books, engraved on walls. But when she died, the nation realized, a marriage without children leaves behind many voids. No one was clearly designated. No one was publicly endorsed by Elizabeth while she was alive. The council tried to hide their confusion, but internal records showed they had debated the next in line for years. Many candidates were considered. Most were distant relatives or former political rivals. James VI of Scotland emerged as the safest option, not because he was loved, but because few choices remained. Elizabeth's decision not to marry was once hailed as proof of her independence. But after her death, it became evidence of a dynasty without a successor. Historians call it the silent succession crisis. No civil war, no power grabs, but also no clear sense of what to do next. A nobleman whispered over dinner, "If she had a son, things would have been simpler." Another replied, "And if she had a daughter, would the court have accepted her?" And so all speculation ended with a silent nod, because no one can rewrite the past. Some said Elizabeth was too stubborn. Others believed she deliberately left no successor to retain control of her legacy. Some even thought she trusted no one strong enough to carry it on, or that no one was worthy. But regardless of reason, the fact remained. The next morning, England woke up without a legitimate head of state. Foreign envoys sent letters asking for clarity. No one dared respond directly. Newspapers hesitated to print the news. Clergy waited for official word from the palace. And meanwhile, political factions began to move. Subtly, skillfully, and without delay. A dynasty had ended, and everyone wanted a seat at the beginning of the next. Those who once praised Elizabeth were now reading speeches welcoming the new king. No one betrayed her. They just adapted very quickly. And England, the land once ruled by a formidable woman, now placed its hopes in a man who had never lived in London. Some commoners were worried, others hopeful for change. But all could sense this. When Elizabeth died, a part of the nation's identity died with her. She had once been the constant in a chaotic world. Now that world had lost its axis, and no one was sure if the new one would spin true. A preacher said in his sermon, "God took her, but gave her no one to leave behind." That line was quoted for years, not because it was poetic, but because it hurt with truth. Elizabeth's legacy wasn't a successor, but a string of unanswered questions. Questions about womanhood, about leadership, about the loneliness of holding absolute power for nearly 50 years. Some said she sacrificed personal happiness for an ideal, but others shrugged. Or maybe she simply didn't trust anyone enough to share the throne. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Like her image. Not fully pitiful, but not entirely admirable either. Elizabeth was a complex person, and death didn't make things any clearer. On the contrary, it revealed this: the price of a great reign is the emptiness it leaves behind. A nation lost its guide. A throne had no one ready to sit upon it. And all that remained was her name, carved in cold stone, but never quite carved into any heart completely. When the council officially confirmed the Queen's death, the next step wasn't burial. It was performance. The first thing they did wasn't pray, they called for a makeup artist. She hadn't moved in 3 days. And now, everything needed to be adjusted to look royal. The maids, dressed in black, with trembling hands and empty eyes, looked as if they were preparing a mannequin, not a woman. They cleansed her face with rosewater, added another layer of white powder, just like every time Elizabeth prepared to appear. But this time, she no longer looked in the mirror. One maid whispered beside her, "We must make her as beautiful as she was in life." But everyone knew this was just a shell. Her eyes were closed by hand, her mouth gently fixed shut so it wouldn't open during the viewing. The wig was adjusted, the crown placed atop her head as if it had never left. Soft fabric was stuffed into her sleeves to prevent her arms from folding unnaturally in the coffin. Someone carefully draped velvet around her neck to hide the hollows beginning to show. Everything was done in silence. No farewells, no weeping, just repeated motions. The room resembled a backstage more than a place of mourning, because the goal wasn't to say goodbye, but to ensure that in her final appearance, she was still the queen. An advisor requested more candles, not to pray, but to ensure good lighting for the portrait. The public would be allowed one last viewing, but only from a distance, no touching. A doctor sighed, "If only we cared for her like this when she was alive, perhaps things would be different." No one responded. No one made eye contact. Everyone was busy preserving ceremonial silence. A young man mounted a portrait of her youth behind the coffin, so mourners would see that instead of reality. They recreated her image with light, powder, silk, and selective forgetting. And finally, Elizabeth appeared once more, not as a person, but as the most beautiful version of a memory. People lined up, bowed their heads, unsure who they were really mourning. A person, a monarch, or an image designed to calm the nation. Some said she looked like she was sleeping. Others said, "No, she's waiting to be remembered in a less real way." For the next 3 days, every visitor was reminded, "Speak softly, don't linger, ask nothing." The coffin closed after official hours, reopened at dawn, like a museum exhibit with fixed opening times. No one knelt, no one kissed her hand. They simply passed by, looked, nodded slightly, and moved on to the New England. A dynasty was closed with a performance as precise as it was chilling. The real woman had long since left. What remained was the final makeup of history. And in that candlelight, death was less frightening than being replaced by a version more acceptable to memory. The funeral was scheduled nearly a week after her passing, long enough to prepare a ceremony, both solemn and strategic. Over 1,000 people joined the procession, from nobles, clergy, to faction representatives. The coffin was carried by a golden dragon carriage, with black cloth-covered wheels, drawn by 4 white horses. Mourning drums beat steadily, cannons fired from the Tower of London, as if celebrating one last victory. The public stood silent on both sides. No one cried, no one smiled. They came out of duty, curiosity, or simply not wanting to miss a national event. Black cloth was handed out to those not dressed properly. Emotions were not inspected. A government official read the eulogy. She was a light that never faded, but everyone knew. The candles burned out last week. The procession passed every place tied to her reign: the palace, chapel, court, watchtower. But no one mentioned the room where she died, because it didn't fit the legend. The hymns were carefully selected, not too sad, not too joyful, just enough for the cameras. A foreign journalist wrote, "I've never seen a funeral with so many people, and so little emotion." The coffin was closed, but on the lid was a wax figure of Elizabeth, her face at least 30 years younger. The figure wore a faint smile, something Elizabeth hadn't truly done in a very long time. The crowd passed by, looked at the statue, and appeared moved, as if they truly believed she had gone in peace. But those who had lived close to her knew peace was never something she had. The quietest moment of the funeral came when the drums stopped. But it was also when someone shouted, "God save the next king." No one mentioned the name Elizabeth anymore. All her emblems were taken down the moment the cannons fired. Some quietly turned away, not out of sorrow, but because they knew the old era had just been locked away by politics. She was buried at Westminster, beside her sister Mary, the same sister she had once refused to be buried next to. But history does not ask the dead for their opinion. History arranges what's convenient. Churches across the nation held prayers simultaneously, as a way to synchronize emotion. But everyone knew, Emotion isn't synchronized. It's choreographed to appear that way. An old monk muttered, "I don't feel her soul here, only the echo of what power once was." On the way home, the crowd began talking about the new king. Some even debated whether James would reform the church laws or rule with the same long, quiet grip as his predecessor. No one asked what happened in her room during those final days. No one wanted to know. A young priest said, "If we make the funeral big enough, people won't ask too many questions." And that's exactly what happened. Cannons, drums, music, wax statue, readings, loud enough to fill the public's void. But to the few who truly loved her, the funeral wasn't a tribute. It was a formal way to legalize her replacement. A servant stood far in the back, not invited, and said one thing, "That's not her." And someone beside him sighed, "But that's what people want to see." The truth, as always, had no place in the ceremony. Only the ritual necessity did. A funeral isn't to say goodbye. It's to declare, the old reign is over. A few weeks later, preparations for James's coronation began, and people started calling Elizabeth the former monarch. Her period was rewritten as a comma in a new sentence. Flags with her image were rolled up and stored. No one knew when they'd be needed again. But for many, Elizabeth's funeral wasn't an ending. It was the day they were forced to accept that what was once great was no longer guarded. And no matter how many drums, cannons, or kind words were spoken, no one could replace the presence that once made a nation fall silent. The dead can be canonized in speech, but only the living decide if they're remembered. In this case, the living chose to move on, without looking back. The funeral ended with a choir, but the loudest sound was the footsteps of important men walking away. No one lingered too long. No one looked back one last time. A century ended not with a sob, but with a checklist of things to change in the next reign. Elizabeth was once the center. Now she was a footnote in a lesson easily skipped if no one asked. The funeral didn't make people remember her more. It just helped them move on faster. And beneath the firework farewell, perhaps she understood that too. Silent in life, painted in death, and finished with drums that weren't meant just for her. It wasn't just a funeral. It was a lesson on how power ends while everyone's still pretending. The day Elizabeth was buried was also the day James was officially called King of England. There was no time for prolonged remembrance. History had already turned the page. James came from Scotland, bringing a new accent, a new advisory board, and a smile just reassuring enough. He didn't need to do much. The exhaustion from the old reign had already prepared the loyalty for the new one. Advisors quickly retranslated their titles into the language of the new court. Your Majesty didn't change, but the direction of the gaze did. In the first meetings, no one mentioned Elizabeth. Not out of contempt, but because her presence no longer served a political purpose. James didn't criticize his predecessor. He simply carried on, as if everything had always belonged to him. He took the throne, handed out titles, reshuffled roles, just to freshen the air. And the strange thing was, no one objected. Parliament held a formal reception, with solemn faces, but beneath them was a sigh few would admit. An old official whispered, "At last, someone who makes decisions without standing still for 3 days." England, after nearly half a century under a woman who never stepped back, now felt relieved to be led by someone who could smile at the right time. James didn't have fire in his eyes, no grand declarations, but he had something Elizabeth had long lost: freshness. And sometimes, freshness is enough. In the first few weeks, he toured the realm, shook hands, gave soft orders, and earned trust simply by being normal. No demands for oaths, no extravagant festivals. Yet the people felt reassured. A blacksmith wrote in his journal, "The new king has strong teeth. Good. He'll reign long." That remark was simple, but deeper than any speech ever given at a coronation. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's statue remained in storage, with no date for display. No one erased her name from history books. They just stopped adding new chapters. Schools still taught her era as a golden age, but no one asked students how they felt about her. Her portraits were replaced by James's, younger, fresher, more direct in gaze. The transition was so gentle, no one noticed they just said goodbye to a generation. A dynasty doesn't vanish by crumbling, but by being replaced, detail by detail. Elizabeth was once the symbol of England. Now, the new symbol was stability regardless of whose face it wore. And James, with one morning smile, became the first in nearly 50 years to let the court breathe easy. It's said that in his first meeting, James smiled and asked, "Is there anything urgent?" No one answered. They were getting used to being asked. In that calm, no one mentioned the one who had gone. But everyone knew Elizabeth would not return. No memorials were built. No proposals for a national mourning day the following year. Only one thing remained. Her shadow, long, cold, stretching through the palace halls. James didn't try to erase that shadow. He just walked through it as if it wasn't there. And perhaps that was what Elizabeth feared most. Not being overthrown, but being left behind. But the kingdom had to go on. The wheel of power does not stop to wait for grief. And so the successor came, not like a storm, but like a breeze opening the windows after a long winter. No one welcomed him with tears, but everyone was ready to listen. And in that first morning, the new king's smile became the first signal of a new era. Not glorious, not dazzling, but enough to begin. And so, for the first time in nearly 50 years, England exhaled. After nearly 500 lines telling the life and death of Elizabeth I, you might be asking, so was she happy? No one can answer that, because even while alive, she never let anyone close enough to ask. She ruled for 44.5 years. No one overthrew her. No one controlled her. But no one truly stood beside her either. In exchange for the crown came a depleted body, an isolated mind, and a death the entire court avoided looking at directly. These things aren't in textbooks. They lie between the lines of history for those who truly read. And you, sitting here, have read far enough to know. Being queen wasn't like the stories tell. There were no gowns fluttering in the wind, no lifelong romance, just a woman carrying an entire country on her shoulders, slowly fading into the silence of the throne she sat on. When Elizabeth died, no one cried out a grand farewell. No one shouted, "We lost a legend." They just changed names on documents, switched the portraits, and moved on. That's the cost of power. No one keeps it forever, and no one is mourned too long. Maybe you're thinking, I wouldn't live like that. But remember, Elizabeth didn't choose to be a symbol. She simply refused to let go when everyone else had. And in doing so, she became a queen through resilience and a loneliness few dared to touch. Her life was a lesson not meant for children or for those who think the crown means only glory. Because maybe no one truly wants to be queen when the price is your entire self. So what about you? If you had to choose, would you live as she did? Stand 3 days so you wouldn't fall in front of history? Or would you stay silent, like those who walked past her, never looking back? Whatever your answer, you've made it to the end of this story. And if this journey was worth it, don't forget to leave a word, a follow, for those history almost forgot. Hi guys, how are you today? If you're sitting on your bed, sipping coffee and watching this video, then savor that feeling just a little longer. Because in just a few minutes, you'll be pulled back 3,000 years to a time when coffee didn't exist and beds were made of stone. Today, I'll guide you into a role, not a pharaoh, not a prophet, but a concubine. Not the main one, you're number 34 out of 97, and he barely remembers your name. You live in a golden palace, but can only step out when summoned, and must retreat when someone more important arrives. People think concubines live in luxury, but have you ever wondered, if you're chosen only for your looks and forgotten when you're not pretty enough, is that really living? Each day, you must learn to smile at people you don't trust, and stay silent even when you feel exposed. What do you think will happen if tomorrow morning, the pharaoh wakes up and decides he wants someone new? There's no warning and no apology. Everything in the palace can change, except your place on the power ladder. You may be praised today and forgotten tomorrow, but still, you must wear your makeup like it's your first day being noticed. They write poems for queens, paint goddesses on walls, but no one tells the story of concubines. Today I will, not to romanticize it, but to show you the quietest roles are often the ones that decide who survives. If you're feeling short of breath, that's normal. Your room has no window, and the incense ran out yesterday. Above you is a stone ceiling. Beneath you is a straw mat covered in linen, more luxurious than a slave, but far beneath a sacred cat. Are you ready? If not, that's fine. No one here waits for you to adjust. But if you want to continue, just take a deep breath, like every concubine has done before opening her eyes each morning. And if you enjoy this style of storytelling, don't hesitate to follow, only if you truly want to walk with me to the end of this palace. We'll start in the room where you just woke up, where every gaze turns away except for the lice and the cat. There's no magic in this story, only perfumed oils, crushed charcoal, and smiles more rehearsed than any dance. This could be your first day, or your last, as an Egyptian concubine. You wake up with an aching back, not from a bad dream, but from the hard, damp straw mat beneath you. The scent around you is a mix of cold stone, dried sweat, and leftover oil from yesterday's ritual, a perfume with no name. The first light doesn't come from a window, there are none, but from a crack in the loft ceiling, just enough to catch dust. You pull your legs in, trying not to disturb the cat sleeping by your pillow. It's worshipped, but you're not so sure about yourself. Your hair is tangled in clumps, stuck to your forehead. You slept like someone afraid of being forgotten if you lay too still. Footsteps echo in the hallway, heels tapping on stone, each step reminding you that the only thing approaching is roll call. You sit up, not because you're ready, but because staying down won't make life any better. No one wakes you up. Everyone's too busy securing their own place on the invisible ladder to favor. Your feet are cold. The stone floor absorbs heat like the hand of death reaching out each morning. You grope for the old linen cloth hanging by the water jar, clean enough to wash your face, dirty enough to leave your skin dry and tight. One shoulder aches. Maybe you slept on a pebble last night, but you don't have the right to complain to a rock. Drums sound from outside, 3 steady beats, announcing that today will be exactly like yesterday. You get up, stepping over 3 pairs of legs, still hoping for one more minute of sleep. This room runs on other people's breath. No curtains, no privacy, just a chipped clay jar to greet you good morning if you wake up late. You glance at your belongings. The chipped jar of lip color is still there, and so is the comb with missing teeth. Every item you own is proof that you're still here, even though no one ever asked if you wanted to stay or leave. Sometimes you wonder, if you disappeared tomorrow morning, would anyone even notice? But then the cat meows softly, and somehow that feels like enough reason to get up again. A young maid passes by the door, says nothing, places a tray of cold water down, then vanishes like smoke. That's all you'll get this morning. 1 cup of water, 1 passing glance, and a few minutes to remind yourself you're still alive. You look into the water, see your blurred reflection, not because it's dirty, but because your eyes don't dare look straight for longer than 3 seconds. Once you tried looking closely and saw features fading day by day. Since then, you no longer linger. You take a deep breath, run your fingers through your hair, and wonder, what kind of smile should I wear today to be remembered? In this room where no one teaches anything, you learn how to survive by watching those who've lasted longer. Some rise early, some rise beautiful. You try to rise without breathing too loudly, so as not to disturb the air. Footsteps sweep past the hallway again, quicker this time. Someone may have been summoned. Could be you. You move toward the door, and not because you want to, but because staying would raise questions. The stone tiles under your feet are just as cold as the first time you stepped in. That feeling has never changed. You don't know how today will unfold. But one thing's certain. Last night's sleep wasn't enough to recover. A new day begins not with sunlight, but with a ritual no one ever asked if you wanted to perform. You leave the room like a shadow, except shadows have the right to stay still if they don't want to move forward. Down the corridor, other concubines are walking too one by one, as if all heading the same way without knowing the destination. No one says a word. Everyone's busy reviewing what needs fixing, or what might make them stand out more than yesterday. You know the overseer's eyes are watching. They don't need to speak. They just note who's late, who smudged eyeliner, who yawned. You glance to the side. Concubine number 33's blush is heavy today. You're unsure if that's boldness or desperation. Footsteps echo steadily between two stone walls, where there's no music, only the rhythm of silent competition. A breeze sneaks in through a small vent, just enough to remind you there's blue sky outside, but not for you. The room ahead is brighter. It means you're near the place where lines are formed. You take one last breath, trying not to shiver, not out of fear, but from the cold. And then you step into that light, where a concubine's day begins not with greetings, but with a single look. In the room to the left, they call it the cleansing area, though you've never seen it truly clean. The walls still were the color of old stone. The water sits in jars, stagnant, cold, and unchanged. You remove your cloth and step toward the shared basin. Yesterday it washed a god's statue. Today it's your turn. The scent of leftover incense mixes with mildew, as if you're bathing in a forgotten dream. Your hand touches the water cold as if stored in the pyramid's basement. You don't gasp, not because you're used to it, but because no one is allowed to complain in the morning. Someone is waiting behind you. Could be number 35 or someone with more privilege. You wipe your face, scoop water through your hair, not wet enough to be clean, but tangled enough to resist brushing. An old maid once said, "Cold water is good for the skin." She vanished 3 days later, so no one confirmed if that was true. You apply a layer of powdered stone to your face, or not to look pale, but to cover what must be hidden when light hits at an angle. Your eyes need to be redrawn. The black pigment is made from burnt ash and resin, a mixture that beautifies while stinging your eyes. You once heard that drawing eyes like the god Horus would grant protection, though no one ever said from what. Your lips are dry, so you use the leftover honey from yesterday's ritual? If you're lucky, no ants will show up. There is no mirror, only water, and water always makes you look more faded than you truly are. You dry your face with a thin cloth old, frayed, and once owned by someone who's no longer in the palace. Every motion is swift and precise, and not because you're in a hurry, but because you've done it unconsciously every day. You once hoped brushing your hair and applying perfume would bring joy, but now, the only feeling is just getting it over with. The scent on your neck is no longer fresh. It lingers from yesterday and the day before. A small red mark appears on your neck, maybe from scratching, or maybe from a loose thread in the cloth brushing you as you slept. You want to ask someone if it's visible, but stop. Everyone is too busy with their own faces. Everyone is polishing the fragile shell they hope will make them stand out. But what gets you chosen isn't makeup. It's the gaze of someone you're not allowed to look back at. You dab a bit of resin on your wrist, then hide it under your sleeve like a thin charm. Once, a concubine told you, if he doesn't notice you, at least let the scent arrive first. You didn't believe her, but you still do it today, not out of hope, but because you don't know what else to do. A maid brings a wooden box. Inside are a few combs, a pumice stone, and some oil-soaked fabric scraps. You choose the comb with the most teeth intact, brushing through hair that still holds grains of sand from a courtyard ritual 3 days ago. Each stroke of the comb makes your hair sigh, or maybe it's you sighing. You can't really tell anymore. You lift your chin, straighten your back, or not to look more beautiful, but to seem less like someone who just woke up from stone. Outside, the sunlight begins to shine into the hallway, signaling it's time for someone to be summoned. Maybe it's you. You put everything back in the box, wrapping up what's called self-care in just 5 minutes. Everything is fast, everything is quiet, because everyone knows. Those who are slow are the ones whose names are forgotten. A voice calls out, not your name, but close enough. You have to go. You stand at the threshold, dress smoothed, face finished, eyes emptied of emotion. You don't know what you'll witness today, or whether someone will witness you, but you know for sure, if you show you're tired or worried, you'll become invisible to those who matter. You take a deep breath. The scent of rotting wood, faded perfume, and limestone surrounds you. The smell of power mixed with waiting. Your feet touch the stone floor for the how many th time you still as cold as the first. Faint music begins from the main hall, steady beats like the heartbeat of a ritual in which you are just one small detail. And so you go not to stand out, but because here, if you don't step forward, you'll be stepped over. The courtyard where breakfast is served lies between two stone corridors. Sunlight pours in, but never enough to feel pleasant. In front of you is a thin bronze tray, no name, no rank, and not many options either. A piece of flatbread as dry as old hope, a pale cup of honey, and a glass of water, warm and murky. They call it a meal for the chosen. Though you've never known who actually chooses the menu, you reach to break the bread, and your first thought is, it won't tear, it snaps, then falls. You try dipping it in honey, but the liquid has thickened like it's been sitting since the festival 3 weeks ago. The honey sticks to your fingers, then picks up dust from your sleeve. Now it's sweet with a touch of old fabric. You look around. Everyone eats as if they know there won't be a second meal today. No one talks while eating, not out of manners, but because food is so scarce that no one wants to be distracted. Once you coughed during a meal, and ever since you've been told, be careful, don't waste it. You take a sip of water, unsure whether it's boiled, filtered, or from yesterday's temple basin. Your throat remains dry, or not due to lack of water, but because you stopped expecting anything from drinking long ago. Another concubine sits nearby, her makeup heavy, eyes unblinking. She eats slower than you. Perhaps she knows eating fast won't get you remembered any sooner. You're still learning that. A maid walks by, her footsteps trailed by incense, like a quiet form of mockery. You try to finish your meal, not out of hunger, but to keep your hands from looking idle if someone glances over. Sometimes you think, if today's the last day, I should at least eat properly. But with what? The flatbread crumbles in your hand, and honey clings beneath your nails, not enough to enjoy, not little enough to forget. You wipe your hands on the cloth covering the tray, something that may have once belonged to someone far more important. Again, you glance around, not searching for a friend, but to see who is being noticed. Concubine number 12 doesn't eat today. She just sits and stares, and you're not sure if it's strategy or a sign she's fading. But you're still eating and still being watched, so you still exist. In the morning light, the overseer's gaze sweeps across like sunlight, slicing the surface of water. You pretend not to notice, but after living here long enough, you know that gaze always carries a mental checklist. A list of who smiled on cue, who ate slowly, who wore crooked makeup, who didn't bow low enough, even who broke their bread or ate it whole. You didn't think it mattered until someone disappeared. Once you asked an older concubine, "Why does breakfast make everyone so quiet?" She smiled, didn't look at you, and said, "Because it's the only time you can sit without acting." You're not sure if it was advice or a reminder that every moment is being watched. Finished, you stand up, not too quickly, not too slow, just enough to avoid standing out among 10 others heading the same way. The tray is left behind. No one looks back. Breakfast is over, and the next contest is about to begin. You leave the courtyard, your throat still carries the bland sweetness, and your heart feels as empty as the untouched bread. A thought crosses your mind. Will there be lunch today? Then you answer yourself, only if someone remembers your name. As you walk, your fingers touch your wrist, where honey still clings, as a way to remember you just existed sweetly. The honey sticks to your skin like a thin memory, easy to lose, but just enough to make you feel you're trying. A speck of dust falls onto the old tray, you see it, and wonder, maybe it was once part of a grander meal. You step past the threshold of the hallway, where the sun is now high. It's no longer early, and you're still unsure if today is a good or bad day. Your feet keep moving forward, but your mind stays behind with the tray you just let go of. That was breakfast. The meal outsiders think is the lightest part of a concubine's day. But for you, it's the easiest thing to swallow, and the hardest to forget. In the small dressing room, light filters through thin cloth, casting a blur that makes everyone look like they stepped out of a shrine painting. But you know the truth. Paintings don't itch, and you're trying not to scratch your nape and ruin your hair. Today's dress is made of fine linen, so thin that standing backlit turns everything underneath into public knowledge. They say it flatters the figure, But wearing it, all you feel is cold on your stomach and itch on your back. The tight garment squeezes you into an ideal shape, not your ideal, but the one written by those who defined palace beauty. You bend down to tie the silk band at your waist, not too tight, because you need to breathe, but not too loose or you'll look like you're not trying. Your wrist glitters with bronze bracelets, but red marks still linger from yesterday. A thin strap rubs against your shoulder, reminding you your skin's been raw for days, and you still haven't been given a new dress. They say concubines have entire wardrobes, but you have 3 sets, rotating in this order. Freshly clean, nearly clean, still wearable. Today is nearly clean. You take a breath, and the familiar stale scent hits instantly: sweat, powder, and something uniquely yours. You subtly adjust your hem, a subconscious move you make every day, as if it's the only thing you can control. The back of your neck still itches, a dull sensation, not painful, but persistent like a rumor. You used to think it was your hair, but after seeing a few tiny bugs fall from your comb, you understood. A maid once whispered, "Lice are a condition, not a disease." You didn't laugh because you didn't know where to aim it. In the palace, everyone smells pleasant, but only from afar. Up close, you smell real skin, damp fabric, and tiny creatures that never give up. You don't dare scratch, because scratching is admitting. Instead, you tilt your head occasionally, as if checking your hairstyle. Sometimes you wonder, how does a place full of stone, incense, and perfume become heaven for lice and fleas? But then you remember, no one washes clothes daily, and sunlight doesn't linger long enough here to clean anything. The dress you're wearing is embroidered with lotus flowers, a symbol of purity, but your back is drenched in sweat. Once, you saw a concubine use clay powder to absorb odor in her dress. She vanished 2 days later from an allergic reaction. You still use that method, but less, just enough to not feel like you're melting in the sun. A decorative stone necklace hangs at your neck, heavy, cool, and useless against the itch. Sometimes you forget where you are, not from daydreaming, but because this outfit is so tight that every move must be calculated. You lower your head slightly to check the back of your dress, not for modesty, but for yesterday's stain. Dress adjusted, hair brushed, smile ready, and the itch still there. You step into the hallway where sunlight lands. From afar, you resemble a living statue. But statues don't sweat, don't itch, and don't worry about fabric sticking to their thighs in the heat. With each step, you feel like you're wearing a costume, thin, beautiful, and utterly unreal. Footsteps echo behind you. Someone else has stepped out with you. They smell better, or so you think. You slow down, and not for grace, but to stop the fabric clinging to your back from slipping into view. A maid passes, holding another set of clothing. It smells better than you imagined. Probably meant for someone ranked a few spots ahead of you. You pretend not to see. Here, not seeing means not hurting. The sun in the courtyard is now harsh. You feel sweat threading through fabric like a warning. Move carefully. One sneeze at the wrong time, one bead of sweat in the wrong place, could be the only thing people remember about you today. You blink, then wonder, am I really living, or just wearing the same mask every morning? No one answers, only a new itch now blooming on the right side of your neck. You stand tall, adjust your sleeve, and turn toward the light. In that glow, at least things appear cleaner. They say beauty requires sacrifice, but they've never worn sheer linen among lice and scrutiny. You step forward not because you're ready, but because your dress is fixed, and your hands have nothing left to do. And like every day, you hope, if not chosen, then at least don't get caught scratching. You've painted your lips, lined your eyes, applied perfume. Now the only thing left to perfect is your smile. But behind that smile lies a battlefield only you know, sore teeth, swollen gums, and breath that hasn't been sweet since last month. No toothpaste, no toothbrush, only salt, ash, and sometimes leaves rumored to whiten teeth. You once tried chewing date skin. It freshened your mouth for a minute, then left a taste like old gravel. Every morning, you swish hot water, hot enough not to burn, yet not hot enough to kill anything. One day, you bit into stale bread and heard a sound like wood cracking from inside your mouth. A front tooth once wobbled for 2 weeks before you learned to smile with a tilted head to hide it. No one in the palace asks if your teeth hurt, because smiling is duty, not emotion. You once saw a concubine faint during a dance. They said it was windstroke, but you knew the blood from her mouth was real. You breathed softly, careful not to let secrets from your mouth drift too far. The mouthwash here is made of spices and scented ash. It burns your throat, but at least masks your own odor. Once, you skipped the rinse, and the look from someone nearby made you feel you'd committed a silent sin. You've learned to speak less, smile on cue, and never open your mouth unless absolutely needed. An ulcer on your lower gum has been with you for half a month. You gave it a name like a roommate. When you swallow, the faint taste of blood reminds you, don't bite down hard. Each night, you sleep on your side, careful not to let your swollen jaw press the mat. One slip, and you can't eat in the morning. No one in the palace mentions dental pain, because saying it out loud means admitting your appearance is no longer perfect. You once dreamed of someone healing you, but the only thing you received was a dried mint sprig from 3 seasons ago. You heard sorcerers can numb gums with sap, but those treated are ranked dozens above you. An old maid once secretly gave you clay mixed with root. You tried it once, then decided the pain was easier than that taste. Sometimes, when the pain eases, you feel lucky. At least you haven't lost a tooth in the middle of a ceremony. But luck is a fragile thing, and teeth don't grow back when you live in the palace. On the day you were summoned near the throne, you only hoped not to smile too long. Not out of fatigue, but fear that a tooth might fall out. They looked at you and said, "That smile is poetry." They didn't know you were clenching your hand to stop your gums from bleeding. You thought, if you could ask for one privilege, it would be silence, no speaking, no chewing, no pretending you're okay. But concubines don't have the right to choose silence. Silence means you've been replaced, not that you're resting. So you keep talking, smiling, enduring, as if your mouth weren't a battlefield. You tell yourself, tomorrow will be better. The teeth will feel better. But deep down, it's just how you stop yourself from screaming now. One last time, you look at your reflection in water, lips still pink, eyes still bright. And the pain is learned to hide just like you have. You turn away, walking on with that smile. Not to charm anyone, but to look like someone still worth noticing. After enough smiling and touching up, you're taken to what they call the training room. There are no large mirrors, no instructors, just a flute, a few gestures, and a series of watchful eyes. You begin moving to the rhythm, not out of love for it, but because no one survives long if they miss a step. A maid beats the drum steadily. It's not loud, but it feels like every beat marks your mistakes inside your head. Right hand up, left foot out, every imperfect move will be remembered, even if unspoken. You once thought being a concubine meant waiting to be chosen. But waiting is only part, the rest is rehearsing without error. Some days you dance for 4 hours straight with no one watching, but you still dance, because someone might be secretly observing. Just like you eat breakfast, not to be full, but because someone is looking. You dance not from passion, but to be remembered. Your hand aches from holding the fan too long. Your shoulders throb from staying upright, but no one asks if you need rest. You once tried to sit down from dizziness. The result was being excused from dance for 2 days, with a look colder than the Nile breeze. When not dancing, you practice speech, phrasing, tone, and silence when silence is best. One exercise: learn to listen in a way that makes others feel pleased. No one teaches it. Fail and you disappear. You were once asked to smile with your eyes. You're still unsure if you did it right, but you're still here, so maybe not entirely wrong. Another day, you were summoned for singing practice, not to sing loudly, but to make sure your voice never escapes closed walls. They say singing is to touch emotions, but here, emotions must be filtered before turning into sound. It took you a week to learn how to greet an official with your eyes, a bow, and not breathing too deeply. A month to know when to step back, when to stand still, and when to accidentally be present. A year to understand. Nothing you do is to be loved. It's to avoid being dismissed. During a break, you look at your hands, fingers slightly swollen from overdancing, nails chipped at the corners. You see number 41 practicing poetry. She said one word wrong and had to relearn the entire piece. No one comforts, no one helps. Everyone carries their lesson like a rock tucked in their robe, heavy, but not to be dropped. Once you saw someone break into tears. No one scolded her, but the next day she was reassigned to teach dance to junior girls. She never returned, so you learned not to cry, or not because you're strong, but because the watchful eyes might see too much. You learned to remember the names of gods, the habits of superiors, even the rhythm of the tiles beneath your feet. None of it gives you freedom. It only helps you survive a little longer among others learning the same. One day, you read mythology not for curiosity, but because someone said, Pharaoh favors those who understand culture. You're not sure if it's true, but here, every rumor is worth studying. Sometimes that's all it takes to be kept. You can't remember the last time you sat still, not practicing, not performing, not correcting, just being. And then you ask, do I even have a self? Or just a version built from endless rehearsals? Some say to live is to do what you love. But here, to live is to do what's asked and do it flawlessly. You leave the training room at noon. Sweat clings to your neck. Powder beneath your eyes starts to smear. You don't have a towel, just the wind and glances that pass by, then turn away. On your way back, you pass a concubine being escorted to meet a guest. She says nothing, just grips her hands tightly. You bow your head without words, because in the palace, any word can become wrong if said at the wrong moment. Once again, you walk the long hallway, where light isn't bright enough, yet still hurts your eyes. You're tired, your mouth is dry, and you're hungry, but you don't stop, because no one's allowed to stop. The work doesn't end with a bell or thanks. It simply pauses until another summons arrives. You no longer feel resentment. You feel used to it, as if this is the real shape of those who want to live longer. Each day you get better, not at dancing or singing or speaking, but at existing without letting anyone see you're tired. And you understand, in the palace, whoever can keep performing, that's who still gets to stand. As you walk past the west corridor, where few people go, you hear laughter, small, brief, and afraid to echo. A group of children are learning to dance, tiny steps repeated over and over, as if someone is teaching them to survive before they even know what living means. Girls aged 8 or 9, thin, pale, dark-eyed from lack of sleep, still trying to smile to the music. One girl falls while turning. No one helps. She gets up immediately, dusts nothing off, sheds no tears. You were once one of them, a tiny shadow trained to smile before your baby teeth fully grew in. In the palace, girls are taught obedience before they learn to write, and silence before learning to breathe deeply. An old woman sits by the door, hair silver, eyes cloudy, still stitching a cloth no one ordered. They say she was once a concubine. Now she's just someone too old to be remembered by name. No one asks if she had children, if she dreams, or if she wants to leave that room. She sits there every day, watching the children dance, then returns to her sewing, as if trying to stitch herself back together. You once thought that if you lived long enough, you'd get to do something besides perform. But looking at her, you understand. Sometimes living longer only means witnessing more. Not every woman in the palace is chosen, but all are forced to wait. The chosen worry about being replaced. The unchosen worry about being forgotten. Some do hair, write poems, bake bread, stay silent, but no one truly gets to be themselves. A pregnant concubine is led across the courtyard. She holds her belly, eyes avoiding everyone. In the palace, giving birth isn't a celebration. It's a test. If it's a boy, you might stay. If it's a girl, no one knows yet. Someone once whispered, if she's born a girl, teach her to smile before she learns to run. You once asked, has anyone ever left here? The answer was yes, but no one remembers their names. Older women fade into corners, where light doesn't reach, and memories are no longer repeated. Some sew, some teach dancing, some simply wait for the day their names stop being called. In the laundry area, A 10-year-old girl wrings cloth with small, stiff hands. No one helps. You see yourself in her. Same height, same way of biting her lip when afraid of making mistakes. You want to ask her name, but remember, no one asks names here without a reason. An older concubine walks by, her posture straight but her gaze hollow, as if emptied years ago. Once you heard her say, "When I was young, I longed to see the pharaoh. Now I just hope not to be seen." Another girl sits curled in the courtyard, messy hair, eyes closed, maybe meditating, waiting, or trying to disappear. In the palace, women are a collective sigh, long, steady, and never heard. You pass by a row of rooms. One once belonged to a concubine who died of fever. Now it stores old belongings. Each item was once part of someone. But now no one remembers whose. Sometimes you wonder, if you disappeared, who would notice first, your dresser or the cleaner? In the palace, you are a puzzle piece fitting somewhere, but easily replaced by any piece the same shape. A group of girls are learning speech, voices high, round, and forced like wind shaped into words. You pause for a moment, then turn away. Here, standing too long can be mistaken for daydreaming. Each girl will grow into a version of the woman you're trying to become. And you are just a version of someone who once walked these halls and is now never mentioned. All of them form a long chain, no names, no endings, no part different enough to be its own story. In the palace, no one is born to become someone. They are only taught not to disappear too quickly. They say if you're not pretty enough to be a concubine, you can learn to perfume the dead. You're unsure if that's comfort or cruelty, but once you're in that group, there's no returning to the main courtyard. Someone brews the wine used in rituals. Its scent drifts across the hall, but they're not allowed a single sip. Someone else is in charge of wiping the statues, a task never spoken aloud, but done precisely every single day. There's a group dedicated to scrubbing the stone floors after rituals. Sometimes it's animal blood, sometimes it's unclear. You once saw them crouching to clean, bare hands, gray rags, no one lifting their head even when others walked by. They're not allowed to touch offerings, not allowed to speak to concubines, not allowed to look directly at the statues, but they hear everything: idle talk, whispered names, and the sound of fear. One maid collects wilted flowers from altars. That fading scent clings to her like a perfume of sorrow. You once asked a kitchen worker, "Is it hot in there?" She smiled and said, "Hotter than the stone courtyard at noon." There's someone who prepares ritual porridge, not for eating, just for offering, then discarding. You didn't understand why food was wasted until someone said, "That portion belongs to the gods. No living soul may touch it." An old woman walks with a crutch. She used to carry water from the Nile to the temple for 50 years. Not once did she rest. When she slipped on a stair, they moved her to the awaiting orders group, a place with no work, no name. Every job in the palace is a gamble. None are truly safe, only some are less visible. You once saw a ritual cleaner in a brown robe, forbidden to cross the red stone line. Yet their eyes always knew who was beyond it. In the kitchen, a girl mixed up spices. 3 days later, she was gone. No one asked. Someone broke a ritual bowl, sent to the inner shrine to assist. No one knows if it was an honor or punishment. Here, mistakes don't need to be written down. They only need to be remembered. And to be remembered is to be removed from all future lines. Someone once said, "Working in the palace is like walking on hot sand. If you stand still, you'll burn. If you run, you'll draw attention." So everyone walks evenly, just fast enough, just quiet enough, just invisible enough not to be called at the wrong time. You look at them, the ones no one praises, no one chooses, and realize, maybe they are the freest people in the palace, because they don't have to look beautiful, don't have to smile, don't have to shine. They just have to keep living in the palace's shadows. In the palace, time isn't measured by holidays or performances, but by the temperature of the stone floor each morning. When it's cold, the tiles exhale a silent chill, not enough to be wind, but enough to creep into your ankles like a warning. You once thought you lived in golden sunlight, but within stone walls, Light only proves the sky still exists. Egypt's winters are short, but when they arrive, the cold seeps into your bones before you can find another layer of cloth. Your dress is still as thin as it was in summer, except now, your sweat no longer drips out, but draws inward. At night, you curl beside an empty water jar not for warmth, but because it's the only place that still holds traces of human heat. A concubine once told you she sleeps with her hands tucked between her thighs to warm her palms. You laughed, then tried it too. No one hands out blankets. No one asks if anyone is cold. In the palace, cold is personal, like toothaches or being forgotten. One morning, you coughed softly. By noon, you were given the day off from dance. You knew it wasn't kindness. It was a sign. Then the cold season leaves, and heat arrives like an impolite god. No knock, no mercy. The air thickens, like each molecule just walked through a smoke-filled ritual and hasn't dissolved yet. The stone under your feet is no longer cold. It burns like a cat's tongue licking your soles through thin sandals. You walk slowly, not out of exhaustion, but to keep your linen dress from sticking to your skin. Every step a negotiation with the heat. Long corridors, low ceilings, and no doors to the outside. The air moves like water trapped inside a sealed jar. Each time you yawn, a wave of hot air escapes and makes you wonder, is your body itself now resisting? Sweat doesn't drip. It evaporates instantly, leaving a salty film and a warm scent around your collar. A maid near you, eyes red from incense, wrists drenched, still says, "Today is cooler than yesterday." You nod, not in agreement, but because you're too tired to argue with someone also melting. You once thought, maybe I'll get used to this. But after 5 years, the only thing you've mastered is hiding sweat behind a smile. On festival days, you wear an extra layer of costume, embroidered cloth, gemstone trims, 3-tiered necklaces, under a 42 degrees Celsius sun. Someone once fainted mid-bow. No one caught her. Only her fingers brushed the ground, like apologizing for collapsing at the wrong time. You learn to breathe through your nose, slow and steady, so your lipstick stays in place and no one hears your panting. Each time you stand near the incense burner, you feel like you're being steamed from the inside, like an offering item. One day the sky turned gray, you rejoiced, but the ceiling still held yesterday's heat, and sweat pooled at your nape. On summer nights, the floor stays warm like a cat's belly, except the cat is worshipped, and you are only left alone if forgotten. You dare not complain about the heat, because heat means weakness. Weakness means falling behind, and falling behind is the first step to being replaced. So you say, "What a lovely day," then sit on a stone slab hot enough to fry bread, pretending it's a velvet chair. In the resting room, everyone shares the same scent, the smell of those who live in stone. Eat little, drink little, breathe less. A girl sits near you, back soaked, hair matted, yet she holds her head high, eyeliner intact. You don't know her name, but you remember her eyes, the kind that say, "I can still endure this." In the palace, those who can still endure are those who still get to stand. Those who endure better get to stand closer to the center. And those who can no longer endure are moved to the support group or for offering if the timing is unfortunate. You once thought summer would be easier, no cold, but you realized nothing is easier, only different ways of sweating. In the heat, your smile dries like cracked earth, holding shape, but no longer alive. You begin to dream of breezes, not from meadows, but door cracks, dark corners, anywhere no one is watching. But in the palace, doors never open, and even shadows are already occupied. So you stand in the light, sweaty, sore, itchy, but still beautiful. Each drop of sweat rolling down your chin is unseen effort, silently acknowledged. In this heat, you don't wish for love, just for someone to let you sit down without judgment. But no one allows it, because in the palace, whether it's cold or hot, you must still stand straight, breathe lightly, and smile as if you are the wind. In the Egyptian palace, you're rarely truly alone, even when everyone else has left, because there are tiny creatures clinging to your seams, living in your stitching, and sometimes crawling across your back while you sleep. They're called the unnamed things, because saying their names is bad luck, yet not saying them doesn't stop the biting. You once woke in the middle of the night, not from dreams, but because your nape itched, a kind of itch that feels like something just arrived and stayed. You didn't scream. Any sound at the wrong time is seen as weakness. Instead, you scratched lightly, then stayed still, accepting this as the only roommate who isn't competing with you. The next morning, you look into a water tray and see a faint red mark behind your ear. You ask no one, apply nothing. Another concubine once joked, "Lice prove your hair is thick enough for poetry." You laughed, then scratched. In the palace, everyone smells nice. But fragrance doesn't kill eggs. It only makes them live more luxuriously. You were once given a herbal ointment for your hair, used it 3 times, then got warned about wasting the treasury. Once you saw a bug crawl across your pillow. It stopped right in the middle of a Horus symbol, as if asking for respect. You raised your hand to swat, then hesitated. The blood inside might be yours, or from whoever used the blanket before you. People say, "Don't worry, they won't kill you." But you know, they kill your sleep 1 hour at a time. One concubine got so used to them, she always carried a wooden comb. For silent conversations with the scalp, you asked to borrow it. She said, "No, everyone must keep their own itch secret." You fix yourself, not to be beautiful, but because if you don't fill that gap, someone else will. In the palace, there's no reward for endurance, but those who endure better live longer. You used to think, maybe if I tried harder, I'd be noticed someday. Now you just think, as long as they don't call my name the wrong way, the way you walk, the way you sit, the way you nod, everything has been adjusted until nothing feels like yours anymore. You're no longer ashamed to stand among people better than you, because you no longer feel much at all. One day, you smiled at a cat walking down the hallway. It looked up and walked away. You envied it, could walk away, but you had to stay because you were taught patience is a noble trait. A new girl entered, young, beautiful, radiant. She passed by and asked, "Is it fun here?" You said, "Yes." You weren't lying. When you no longer have expectations, everything becomes easier to accept. Every evening, you rest your hand on your forehead, staring at the stone ceiling, wondering, if I disappeared, how long until someone replaced me? A roommate of yours once left. No one mentioned her again, and her bed was filled that very night. You didn't cry, because if you cry, who will wipe your tears? And if someone does, will they remember why? You learned something. To survive the palace, you don't need to believe in the future. You just need enough calm to get through today. Some days you smile all day, no one asks why. Some days you're silent, no one wonders. You're no longer a person. You're software, programmed by rituals, schedules, and reflexive, "Yes, Your Majesty." They say, women in the palace are protected. But you know, not being touched doesn't mean being loved. You once saw a concubine say the wrong thing. She wasn't scolded, but from that day she disappeared from every list. Since then, you learned to speak less, then even less, then barely at all. You began to measure your worth by whether you were praised or at least not forgotten today. Sometimes that's enough. A maid once asked, "Are you sad?" You replied, "No," and honestly, you weren't sure that feeling existed anymore. You eat, work, sleep, and repeat, no different from the statues around the temple. But statues don't get hungry. Statues don't itch. Statues don't ask, "Am I still alive?" But you do, though those questions grow shorter and the answers grow quieter. Someone once said, if you stop feeling, you stop hurting. You found that only half true, because you no longer feel pain. But whatever replaced it, you can't name. You walk slower now, not from exhaustion, but because there's no reason to hurry. Each step is like a marker of your presence. No praise, no objection, but still worth noting. No one sings in the palace. No one tells stories, and no one talks about those who left. Silence grows thicker, like fog. Not sharp, but seeping into your neck, shoulders, and mind. Sometimes you hear your own breath, and you think, at least I still make a sound. The palace is still lit. The schedule is still steady. You're still here, eating, brushing your hair, bowing, smiling. But somewhere in your mind, something has stepped back. Not dead, but no longer moving forward. Each day you repeat a silent song, no audience, no finale. Outsiders might say, "Life here must be blissful." You nod, then turn away. In your heart, there's no hope, only routine. And that routine is what's kept you standing in this palace longer than most. No one rewards endurance, but if you endure long enough, you become part of the stone walls. Unshaken, untouched, and no longer needing anything. You understand. Surviving the palace isn't about rising up. It's about not disappearing into silence. And as long as someone calls your name in the morning, you'll keep walking, no dreams, no complaints, no expectations. When the last light withdraws from the hallway, you know, you've survived another day. No one announces it, no one claps, but you still acknowledge it with footsteps heavier back to your bed. The wind slips through the cracks in the wall. Not strong enough to cool you, but enough to chill your neck. The stone floor stays damp. Even on hot days, it always keeps the moisture from old ceremonies. You remove your necklace. Each tiny jingle sounds like a farewell to a role just played. The thin rope comes off, not to free you, but to prepare for a sleeping position that avoids too much contact with the floor. You lie on your side, back to the wall, like every night. No one tells you how to face, but everyone sleeps the same way. A concubine in the corner sneezes. No one checks on her. Everyone here is too busy holding their position. A cat meows faintly in the courtyard. It sounds so real, you almost believe it called your name. You close your eyes, not because you're sleepy, but because they started to sting back in the practice room. The left side of your cheek touches the straw mat, dry, rough, but at least it's still yours. Each breath reminds you, you're not dead, but whether this is living, you're not so sure. You don't dream. It's been ages since sleep showed you anything, just darkness, and then morning. A girl next to you shifts in her sleep. Her back stays straight, even in dreams. Her spine remembers palace posture. You hear light footsteps in the corridor. A maid doing her rounds, or someone being summoned. No one in the room asks. Asking is a sign that someone still has hope. You pull part of your robe over your arm. It's not warmer, but it makes you feel like you're taking care of yourself. A small light on the ceiling, moonlight piercing a hole, landing squarely on your palm. You turn your hand over, as if holding the light means holding on to something that's still yours. Footsteps fade. The final wooden door clicks shut. The day officially ends. No one calls for you. No one waits for you. And you never really waited for anyone either. You whisper your name in your mind. No one hears it. No one repeats it. But you want it to stay inside your memory. Your name used to be etched into a serving tray. Now it's just a faint mark at the bottom of the bronze. You used to be chosen to sing during rituals. Then you weren't. You didn't ask why. Here, there is no reason. Only replacement. You pull your legs in and curl up like every night, the safest shape to avoid bumping or being bumped. A light breeze moves. Sand sifts through the cracks, falling beside your pillow. No one sweeps it. Sand belongs here like you. Someone sighs. You don't know who. Could be you or maybe a dream fading out. You open your eyes one last time. Not to see, just to check if your eyelids still respond. Then you close them again. Breathe slowly and let your body sink into that nameless, quiet peace. No one promises tomorrow will be better, but you also don't wish it worse. In that moment, you understand. You don't need love or to be chosen, you just need to wake up. Not to live a concubine's life, just to see your name still on the morning roll call. You sleep, not for dreams, but because it's the last thing today you can do without pretending. The stone floor grows colder beneath you. The room stills further. Time slides by like an uninvited guest. On the wall, the deity in the painting smiles faintly. You smile back, though no one sees. A day ends. No sadness, no joy, nothing special. But still, a day survived. And for you, that's enough. Not out of gratitude, but because you've stopped expecting more. You sleep, hands still placed where the moonlight shines, like a final reminder, I'm still here. And in the ancient palace of Egypt, the night begins again as it has for millennia. quietly, coldly, and no name spoken unless necessary. If you're still awake after 480 lines, welcome to the backstage of an ancient dream. A place where all statues are flawless, and everyone living beside them stays silent to fit the frame. You've seen the room, the mat, the falling moonlight, and a body long used to being invisible. Not a goddess, not a destined lover, just a name in line on a list. No prince ever wanders into the palace. No one mistakes you for the queen, and there's no magic. You won't rewrite history. You won't die tragically by a golden river. You'll simply fade with time. The stone tablets once etched with your name were worn away centuries ago. But the dinner token still gets scanned daily. No one tells your story in films, but you might show up blurry in a CGI frame beneath Cleopatra's feet. And if you think modern life is stressful, at least you have shoes, a name card, and a private toilet. Here you can be pretty, but you can't be yourself. You're made up not to look good, but to look identical. You're selected not for your qualities, but for your measurements and silence. Every step aligns with rhythm, not of music, but of unspoken orders from the entire palace. So, if you could choose again, would you want to live in an Egyptian palace? Not to change history, just to feel grains of sand slip past your robe in a suffocating long night. Maybe you'd say yes. Maybe you'd want a taste of glory for just a day. Or maybe you're just tired of utility bills and forgot the value of uneventful peace. Either way, thank you for living through a full day with us as concubine number 34. If you still think life today isn't so bad, soft beds, hot water, and TikTok, leave us a like. And if you still want to go back to ancient Egypt for that royal experience, no worries. We've got a few spots left. Ha ha ha.